Welcome to the Sleepy Cosmos channel, a place where science and serenity meet. Here we explore the quiet wonders of the universe, from dark matter to string theory, all told in a calm, soothing rhythm designed to help you relax, drift, and dream among the stars. Each video is a guided journey through the cosmos, slow, meditative, and filled with real science wrapped in gentle storytelling. So if you love space, curiosity, and the peaceful side of knowledge, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe for more new sleep narrations every week. And if you'd like to reach out for collaborations or business inquiries, you can contact us at the sleepycosmoschannel@gmail.com. Now, settle in, take a deep breath, and let's drift into the universe together. Tonight, we drift into a quiet examination of parallel timelines, not as fantasy, and not as the multiverse you may have heard described in popular stories, but as something more grounded, more analytical, and far closer to the way modern physics actually describes the evolution of reality. A calm exploration of how possibilities unfold, how information changes, and how the world we experience may be only one path through a vast landscape of branching events. Not separate universes, not cosmic bubbles floating in a larger sea, but a single mathematical structure, unfolding into many consistent histories, each one shaped by the rules of quantum mechanics, each one quiet, independent, and complete. As you settle in, let your breathing slow, allow your mind to soften, and treat every idea as a gentle ripple. Nothing to grasp tightly, nothing to conclude, just shapes drifting across an inner sky, calm and unhurried, parallel timelines. In physics, begin with the idea that the universe does not evolve along a single narrow track, but through a vast collection of possible states, each one guided by the same mathematical laws, each one allowed by the same underlying structure of reality. When physicists speak about possibility, they are not speaking casually. They are describing something woven into the equations themselves, something fundamental, like the way light behaves, or the way gravity curves space. Quantum theory tells us, with remarkable clarity, that physical systems do not carry a single fixed outcome until they are observed, or, more precisely, until they interact with their surroundings in a way that makes certain results stable, and others fade. Before that stability forms, a system explores a range of potential states, not as separate universes floating somewhere far away, but as overlapping mathematical configurations, coexisting in a single description of nature. When these configurations interact with their environment, something gentle and deeply important happens. Decoherence, a slow separation of possibilities, a gradual unweaving of outcomes, until each one evolves as though the others are no longer present. This is one of the roots of parallel timelines, not in the dramatic sense of science fiction, but in a quiet, methodical sense, rooted in the way information behaves. Every interaction, every exchange of energy, every shift in the state of a particle creates new distinctions, new details in the fabric of reality, and these distinctions grow and accumulate until different possibilities can no longer overlap or influence one another. They become histories, they become timelines, they become separate paths the universe could follow, and does follow, within the full mathematical description of the world. As you lie here, you remain on one of those paths, one consistent unfolding of events, one continuous thread through the space of possibilities. But physics tells us that this thread is not the only thread that could have been followed, and not the only one that actually exists within the full quantum description. There are other paths, quietly diverging, quietly unfolding, not accessible, not observable, not reconnecting with the one you know, but still part of the underlying structure. The idea can feel large, even overwhelming, but let it settle slowly, without urgency, without pressure. Just the thought that the flow of reality, the one that carries your experiences, your memories, your quiet presence here, is one branch among many. Not because the universe is crowded, but because the laws of physics allow many consistent ways for events to unfold, and the mathematics does not choose a single one, until interactions make some outcomes stable, and others fade into paths that no longer influence the one you travel. Tonight, we are not trying to solve the foundations of quantum theory, or to argue for one interpretation over another. We are simply drifting through the ideas, letting them unfold at a gentle pace, letting them become soft shapes in the mind. Parallel timelines are not separate universes with different constants, or different laws, or different physics. They are simply the natural consequence of a system whose evolution depends on probabilities, interactions, and the growth of information. A timeline, in physics, is not a mystical thread, but a record of how the universe's state changes from one moment to the next, how one configuration leads to the next configuration, how a system moves through the vast space of all possible states it could occupy. When you look at the world around you, every detail, every texture, every sound is one selection among many possibilities the universe could have followed. A grain of dust might have floated a little more to the left or a little more to the right, depending on the tiniest differences in molecular motion. A photon of light might have scattered in a slightly different direction, illuminating one part of a room instead of another. A neuron might have fired a fraction of a moment earlier or later, shaping a thought, a memory, a perception. Most of these shifts are subtle, so subtle that they leave no trace on your awareness. But they are still distinctions in the unfolding of events, and distinctions accumulate, they grow, they separate histories, they define which timeline becomes the one you experience. When physicists talk about branching, they are not imagining dramatic splits, they are describing tiny differences, microscopic, continuous, always present. The universe does not choose one possibility in a single sweeping moment. It constantly shapes and reshapes its own path. Through endless interactions, endless exchanges of information, endless decoherence events spreading through the environment, every possibility that remains stable becomes part of the timeline you experience. Every possibility that loses coherence, part of a different branch, one that you do not inhabit, but that still exists as a consistent solution of the equations. This picture can sound abstract, but it is part of the calm beauty of physics. A reminder that reality is richer, quieter, and more intricate than our everyday experience suggests. As you relax, let yourself imagine the structure of a timeline, not as a line, but as a path through a landscape of possibilities, a path defined by the laws of nature, by the interactions of particles, and by the simple fact that information does not stand still. Every breath you take changes the physical state of your body, your environment, the air around you. Every heartbeat sends signals through your nervous system, each one creating a new configuration, a new arrangement of matter, a new point on the path. And beneath all of this, beneath every biological process, every thought, every quiet moment, lies a world governed by quantum mechanics, a world where superpositions fade into stable outcomes, and stable outcomes become the building blocks of experience. Parallel timelines are not separate realms, but separate evolutions of information, separate ways the universe's state could unfold, and does unfold, within the mathematics. The idea is gentle, not dramatic, and it carries no fear, because you experience only one path, one continuous flow of moments, one smooth thread of awareness. The existence of other threads, other paths, other timelines, does not disturb the one you know. They are silent, non-interactive, wrapped in their own coherence, separate because the physics makes them separate. When you close your eyes, you are not slipping into another timeline. You are simply resting within the one you inhabit, the one defined by the exact sequence of events that led to this moment, to this breath, to this calm. Parallel timelines do not converge or cross or replace one another. They are isolated by the structure of quantum interactions, isolated by decoherence, isolated by the way information spreads through the environment. Imagine a drop of ink spreading through water. Once it disperses, it cannot spontaneously come back together into its original shape. Not because it is forbidden, but because it is overwhelmingly improbable, because every interaction spreads the information further, making the original configuration unreachable. In the same gentle way, once two branches of a quantum history diverge, they cannot recombine, because they no longer share the same correlations, the same information, the same structure. The universe moves forward, quietly, irreversibly, growing more detailed, more specific, more defined with every passing moment. This is the foundation on which parallel timelines rest, the quiet accumulation of distinctions, the separation of outcomes, the growth of information, and the simple fact that different possibilities become incompatible with one another as time unfolds. as you drift deeper into calm, let the idea feel less like a theory and more like a slow, meditative observation, a recognition that the world is always choosing, not by intention, but by interaction. Every particle carries its history, every atom carries its trajectory, every system evolves in a way that is shaped by its surroundings. The timeline you experience is one consistent record of these interactions, a coherent history, a single path through the branching structure of possibilities. Parallel timelines are the other paths, the ones that unfold when different interactions occur, the ones that emerge when tiny differences cascade into distinct outcomes, the ones that persist in the mathematics, even though they never intersect with yours. Let this thought settle gently, because the point of this journey is not to reach an answer, but to rest in the quiet complexity of the world, to feel the serenity that comes from understanding something profound without needing to solve it. You are lying on one thread of reality, a calm, steady, continuous thread. The rest are simply other threads, quiet, peaceful, and far beyond the reach of observation. And tonight, we follow only one, the one that carries you into rest, into stillness, into a soft exploration of the physics of alternate realities, the physics that makes branching possible, the physics that shapes every moment. Allow the ideas to settle, like dust drifting through still air, each particle following its own path, each branch of possibility unfolding quietly within a universe governed by laws, steady, mathematical, and deeply calm. You do not need to understand every detail. You only need to drift with the ideas, letting them become gentle shapes in your mind as the world fades and you drift deeper into the softness of night. The idea of a timeline in physics is far quieter and far more precise than the way the word is used in everyday language. A timeline is not a road the universe travels, not a line drawn through history, not a single thread stretching from past to future. A timeline in physics is simply the sequence of states a system passes through, one configuration after another, each one defined by the precise values of all the measurable quantities, and each one linked to the next by the laws that govern change. It is the continuity of information, gently unfolding, gently transforming, with no jumps and no breaks. A state is like a snapshot, not in the visual sense, but in the informational sense, a complete description of everything that can be described, from the arrangement of atoms to the motion of particles to the correlations that bind systems together. Even the smallest detail, a particle slightly to the left or slightly to the right, a vibration a little faster or a little slower, changes the entire state, because a state is not a photograph, it is a structure of mathematics, a position in the abstract space of all the ways the universe could be arranged. And as the universe evolves, the state moves through this space, tracing a path, a gentle curve guided by physical laws. This path is what we call a timeline. It is not rigid, not absolute, and not fixed, but it is coherent, consistent, and governed by rules that never waver. Time itself, in this view, is simply the ordering of these states, the way one configuration leads into another, the way information flows, the way the universe updates itself, moment by moment, in incredibly small increments. Not minutes, not seconds, but changes in the underlying variables, changes so precise that we can barely conceive of them. As you listen, you can imagine these states unfolding quietly, like pages turning themselves, not to tell a story, but to reveal one arrangement of reality after another. When we say that two timelines diverge, we mean that the sequence of states splits into different paths, not because the universe chooses differently, but because small differences in the present grow into large differences in the future. A tiny variation in the motion of one particle, a tiny shift in the position of one atom, can lead to different states later. Different interactions, different outcomes. This sensitivity does not make the world unpredictable, but it does make it rich, layered, full of branching possibilities. And in quantum mechanics, these differences are not just hypothetical, they are built into the structure of the theory, because the state of a system is often described not as a single possibility, but as a superposition of many possibilities, mathematically coexisting, until interactions with the environment select one, or, more precisely, select a stable classical path. The moment a system becomes entangled with its surroundings, the moment information about its state spreads into the environment, the different components of the superposition begin to separate, slowly at first, then irreversibly, each one evolving as if the others were no longer present. This is how branching begins, not with dramatic splits, but with the quiet accumulation of distinctions. As information flows outward, as the system becomes correlated with the world around it, and as the many mathematical possibilities of quantum theory are filtered into stable outcomes. What physicists call decoherence is the process through which this filtration happens, and through which parallel timelines emerge as separate, non-interacting histories. In this gentle view, a timeline is not a physical object, but a consistent sequence of states, one branch of the larger quantum structure, and it continues as long as the system maintains coherence along that path. You can imagine the universe not as a single line, but as an immense network of possible paths, each one defined by the way information could evolve, each one consistent with the laws of physics, and each one isolated from the others once decoherence has done its quiet work. This network is not chaotic. It is structured, ordered, mathematically elegant. But you perceive only one path, the path defined by the correlations that bind your experiences together, the path that leads from your memories to your thoughts, to the soft unfolding of this moment. Even though the mathematical structure includes many branches, your awareness rides only one, a single continuous sequence of states that feel like a unified life. Physicists describe this continuity as the classical limit, the level at which quantum possibilities fade and the world feels stable, definite, solid. But deep beneath that stability, every system continues to explore possibilities. Every particle continues to evolve according to quantum laws, and every small interaction continues to create new distinctions, new correlations, new branches. The reason this branching does not overwhelm experience is that decoherence isolates the branches, sealing each one off, preventing interference, and allowing each timeline to unfold on its own, quietly, independently, in a way that feels completely classical. You can think of the universe evolving along a path, but the path is not singular. It is selected, filtered, carved out of possibility by the flow of information. Every breath you take alters the state of the world around you. Every heartbeat, every thought, changes the configuration of atoms and steers the universe further along one particular branch. Small differences accumulate, and the timeline becomes increasingly defined, increasingly stable, increasingly separated from the many timelines that could have unfolded instead. This is why time feels like a river, even though it is not a river, not a substance flowing, but a sequence of states, each one following from the previous one through the laws of physics. Because the transitions are smooth, even when the underlying mathematics is complex, because the continuity is unbroken, even when the possibilities are wide, because your awareness moves with the flow, and every moment feels linked to the last. The definition of a timeline, in physics, rests on the idea that the universe's state contains all the information needed to determine how it will evolve, whether deterministically, as in classical mechanics, or probabilistically, as in quantum theory. Even when the evolution includes randomness, as quantum events often do, the timeline remains continuous because randomness does not break the chain of states. It simply alters the structure of the next configuration. A random event is not a disruption. It is a change in the branching pattern, a point where possibilities separate, each one forming its own coherent history. And this separation is where parallel timelines begin to take shape. They are not created in dramatic moments. They arise naturally and constantly, as a result of how quantum states evolve, how interactions spread information, and how the environment records outcomes. Imagine a simple event, the scattering of a photon off a dust particle. If the scattering occurs at a slightly different angle, it can illuminate a different part of a surface. It can warm one molecule instead of another. It can trigger a slightly different chemical vibration. Most of these differences are subtle, invisible to your senses, but they are differences in the state of the universe, and they lead to slightly different evolutions. Over time, differences accumulate, even microscopic ones, and the timeline you inhabit becomes increasingly defined by these distinctions. Parallel timelines are the ones shaped by other distinctions, possibilities that unfolded with slightly different initial conditions, slightly different interactions, slightly different outcomes. Physics does not erase them, it simply isolates them, because once the information that distinguishes one branch from another becomes embedded in the environment, the branches no longer overlap, no longer interfere, no longer share correlations. They become separate histories, parallel, non-communicating, and still governed by the same laws. The notion of time as a sequence of states also means that a timeline is not a physical substance, but a mathematical trajectory, a path through the phase space of all possible configurations, guided by equations that determine how each variable changes. These equations are smooth, continuous, and precise, which is why timelines do not jump or skip, even though quantum events introduce probabilities. The continuity of the mathematics ensures that every possible path is a valid one, as long as it follows the rules. This is the essential idea behind parallel timelines, that the universe is not limited to one path, but supports many possible paths, each one consistent, each one self-contained, each one unfolding quietly. There is a gentle beauty in this idea, a sense that the world is far more intricate than it appears, that the structure of reality is not a single thread, but a branching tapestry, woven from the flow of information itself. And yet, you experience only one path, because your consciousness, your memories, your subjective continuity are all bound to one specific sequence of states, the one defined by the exact configuration of your brain, your body, your environment, in this moment. Parallel timelines do not dilute your experience. They do not divide your awareness. They simply represent the paths the universe could follow, and does follow, within its full mathematical description. The timeline you inhabit is one expression of the laws of physics, one solution of the equations, one unfolding of events, and it feels singular, precise, beautifully coherent. The fact that there are other solutions, other paths, other histories, does not diminish the one you experience, because the laws of physics isolate each branch, ensuring that the continuity of experience remains intact. The idea of parallel timelines often raises questions about decision, about choice, about agency, but the physics is quiet on these matters, not because they are unimportant, but because identity and consciousness are emergent structures, built on the foundation of physical states, and the timeline you inhabit is simply the one consistent with your experiences, your memories, your moment-to-moment structure. As the universe evolves, it continues to generate distinctions, and each distinction leads to new branches, new paths, new possible futures. But you are carried along one path, the one defined by the continuity of your mind, the one shaped by the exact correlations that make you who you are. Parallel timelines are not alternatives you can sense or access or return to, because they are isolated by decoherence, sealed off by the structure of quantum information. You rest within one branch, and it unfolds smoothly, carrying you from moment to moment, carrying you through experience, carrying you through this gentle exploration. The calmness of this idea comes from its precision and its simplicity. The universe evolves according to laws. Those laws allow many possible states, and the accumulation of small distinctions creates branches, each one a timeline, each one a coherent history, each one quietly separate. As you drift deeper into rest, the idea of a timeline becomes softer, less rigid, less like a path, and more like a flowing structure, a gentle evolution of information, a mathematical object that carries your experiences, your thoughts, your presence, and the knowledge that parallel timelines exist, in the mathematics, in the theory, in the structure of physical law, can feel less like a mystery and more like a quiet landscape, spreading softly beyond the horizon, silent, unreachable, but always there. To understand what physicists truly mean by a timeline, you must imagine reality not as a story, but as a structure that changes, quietly, smoothly, inevitably, from one configuration to the next. A configuration is not a photograph you could hold. It is not an image or a picture. It is a complete specification of everything that exists in a given moment. Every particle, every field, every correlation between them, laid out in the language of mathematics. This configuration is called a state, and a timeline, in the strict scientific sense, is simply the procession of these states, stacked one after another, each one emerging from the last, like a whisper passed along a chain of moments. You can imagine this if you wish, but you don't need to, because the idea itself is simple. even if the machinery behind it is immense. The universe evolves, and its evolution is continuous, so the sequence of states that describe it is also continuous. This is what physicists mean by time. Not a flowing river, not a current that sweeps everything along, but an ordering, a structure, a quiet indexing of configurations, each one slightly different from the previous one, each one carrying the history of the last. Time is the label we place on change, and a timeline is the path traced through all the possible ways the universe could be arranged. If you think of time as a river, it feels like something external, something the universe is moving through. But in physics, time is internal, a way of describing how the universe itself transforms. The flow you feel is simply the experience of your own state updating, moment by moment, as neurons fire, as signals propagate, as the configuration of your body and mind is replaced with the next configuration, and the next, in a smooth procession. If nothing changed, if every state were identical, there would be no time at all. Time emerges from difference, from the fact that the universe never repeats a state perfectly, because even the tiniest fluctuations, the smallest quantum variations, guarantee that each configuration is unique. This is why the idea of time as a sequence of states is so central to physics, because it allows us to describe the universe as something that evolves, not something that flows. And from this simple foundation, the concept of parallel timelines becomes clear, because if the universe can evolve along one path, it can also evolve along another. As long as both paths follow the laws that govern state change, the laws themselves are unchanging, but the path they produce depends delicately, precisely, on the details of the current state. A state with one arrangement of atoms will evolve one way. A state with a slightly different arrangement will evolve another way. And in quantum mechanics, states often contain many possibilities at once, not because the universe is confused, but because its behavior is described by mathematical objects that allow multiple potential outcomes to coexist, until interactions with the environment separate them, split them, push them into different branches. To understand why small differences lead to different timelines, you must consider how sensitive physical systems are. Not in the dramatic sense of chaos, but in the mathematical sense of divergence. When physicists talk about the evolution of a system, they mean that the system is following a trajectory through what is called state space, a vast mathematical landscape where each point corresponds to one possible configuration of reality. A timeline is a curve through this landscape, smooth and continuous, drawn by the laws of motion, like a thread winding through infinite possibilities. If two trajectories begin at slightly different points, even if the difference is unimaginably small, the laws of physics will carry them along different paths, subtly at first, then increasingly, as each tiny variation grows, interacts, and magnifies. And when quantum mechanics is involved, these tiny differences do not merely arise from small shifts or imperfections, they arise from the nature of quantum states themselves, because quantum states are not single points in state space, they are extended shapes, spreading across many possible values, many potential outcomes. A quantum state is like a cloud in this landscape, not in a literal sense, but in the sense that it spans many possible configurations, each one allowed, each one part of the full description. When such a state interacts with the environment, tiny differences inside the cloud are amplified, because the environment records information, and these records separate the cloud into distinct components, each one evolving independently, each one tracing its own curve through the landscape. This is branching. This is the beginning of parallel timelines, not dramatic, not violent, not abrupt, but delicate, continuous, and mathematically precise. A single superposition state evolves into multiple decoherent outcomes, each one a timeline, each one consistent, each one sealed off from the others. To understand why time is not a river, but a sequence of configurations, you can imagine that each configuration is like a position in a high-dimensional space, a space so vast that even small differences are immense, yet the mathematics handles it with ease. The universe does not travel through time, it simply takes on one configuration after another, and the ordering of these configurations is what we experience as time. Your memories are simply correlations, present in the current configuration, that reference earlier configurations. Your sense of continuity is simply the structure of your mind, preserved across successive states, like a pattern that moves through the landscape, unchanged in its identity, but constantly updated in its details. Timelines diverge when the pattern ceases to be identical across branches, when the differences in the underlying state grow large enough that the patterns follow different trajectories. In quantum mechanics, this divergence happens through decoherence. But the logic of divergence also exists in classical physics, because sensitivity to initial conditions ensures that tiny differences produce distinct futures. Quantum mechanics simply adds a deeper layer, because the initial conditions themselves can be superpositions, and the divergence can occur even when the state is perfectly described, because the mathematics allows multiple outcomes to coexist until decoherence separates them. The idea that time is a sequence of states also means that the universe does not need an external clock. It carries its own time within its structure, because change itself defines the ordering, and the laws of physics determine how fast or slow the sequence proceeds. When you think of timelines diverging, imagine a single thread splitting into two, not sharply, but gradually, as tiny differences accumulate until the two threads no longer touch, and each follows its own path. At the beginning, the differences are microscopic, imperceptible, buried in the details of quantum interactions. But as the universe evolves, these differences spread, mix, branch out, and eventually shape the macroscopic world. This is why parallel timelines are not exotic. They are simply the natural consequence of how information flows and how states evolve. A timeline becomes distinct when the differences between two branches become embedded in the environment, when photons, vibrations, air molecules record the outcome of an event, and those records spread outward, irreversibly, sealing the branches apart. This recording process is crucial, because without it, quantum states remain entangled and interference is possible. But once information has leaked into the world, once the differences between branches have been multiplied and scattered, the branches cannot reunite, because the environment holds the distinctions, locking each branch into its own isolated evolution. When physicists talk about a difference being large enough, they mean large enough to be recorded, to leave traces in other systems, to shape future interactions. A difference of this kind defines a distinct timeline, because only one of the possible outcomes becomes correlated with your state and with the state of the world you inhabit. The other outcomes still exist in the mathematical description, but they lie along different paths, separate, silent, decohered. If you imagine the landscape of possible configurations, you can picture these paths as threads weaving through an immense space, never crossing, never interfering, each one a consistent history, each one a solution to the equations. Small differences in quantum states lead to these diverging paths because the evolution of the state is linear and sensitive, meaning that even slight changes produce distinct trajectories, and because decoherence spreads those distinctions through the environment, magnifying them until the branches become completely isolated. And yet, despite all this complexity, your experience remains simple, calm, continuous. You inhabit one branch, one sequence of states, one timeline. The existence of others does not influence you, does not destabilize your world, does not introduce uncertainty, because decoherence prevents interaction, like a quiet barrier made of information itself. You rest in a single classical reality, because classical reality is what emerges when decoherence has separated the branches enough to give you a stable path, a stable set of correlations, a stable sense of self. Even though the underlying physics supports many paths, your awareness follows only one. This is what physicists mean when they say that time is not a river, but a series of configurations, and that timelines diverge through the natural unfolding of quantum states. There is no moment when the universe decides to split, no sharp boundary between branches, no sudden creation of alternate realities. There is only information, flowing, interacting, being recorded, and in that quiet spread of information, branches take shape, timelines separate, and the classical world emerges. And as each branch grows more detailed, more complex, more filled with recorded distinctions, the separation becomes complete. You drift along one branch, while countless others unfold silently, not above or below, not elsewhere, but as other paths through the same mathematical landscape. each one unreachable, each one independent, each one carrying its own quiet continuity. This is the full picture of a timeline in physics, a continuous unfolding of states, defined by laws, shaped by quantum distinctions, and branching through decoherence into a gentle multiplicity of possible histories. And with these ideas complete, the flow naturally drifts toward the next theme, the deeper mechanics of quantum decoherence, and how the splitting of realities truly occurs. Moment by moment, everywhere in the universe. Quantum decoherence is one of the quietest foundations of modern physics, a process so gentle, so constant, so deeply woven into the fabric of reality that you experience it every moment without ever sensing its presence. It is the mechanism that shapes the world you see, the world you touch, the solid and classical world that feels stable beneath your thoughts, and yet it arises from rules that are soft, subtle, and profoundly different from the everyday experience of objects and matter. To step into decoherence, you must begin with the idea of superposition, a quantum concept that sounds mysterious only because it behaves differently from the classical world. A superposition is not a thing being in two places at once, and not a choice the universe has not yet made. It is a mathematical structure, a way of describing all the possibilities the system can explore. All at the same time, within a single quantum state. Each possibility is not a separate world, but a component, a term in an equation, a wave-like pattern describing how the system might evolve. These components can overlap, interfere, and combine in ways that have no classical counterpart. This is the realm where particles behave like waves and waves behave like probabilities, and the universe expresses its possibilities in delicate, beautiful, mathematical forms. But this delicate structure cannot survive the world we live in, because the world is noisy, crowded, filled with interactions, filled with constant exchanges of information. Every photon, every vibration, every collision of molecules is an interaction, and interactions are the beginning of decoherence. To understand this, imagine a single quantum particle spread out in a cloud of possibilities, each possibility representing a slightly different configuration, a slightly different path the particle could take. As long as the particle is isolated, these possibilities remain coherent, overlapping, allowed to influence one another, producing interference patterns, ripples of probability, waves upon waves of potential futures. But isolation is fragile, and the universe is never truly still. A single photon strikes the particle. A faint vibration passes through the surroundings. A molecule shifts slightly because of thermal motion. And in that moment, the quantum state becomes entangled with the environment. The environment begins to carry information about which possibility the particle corresponds to, and the overlapping structure of the superposition begins to fade. Not because the possibilities vanish, but because the environment now treats them as different, distinct, no longer able to interfere. This fading of interference is decoherence, a slow separation of possibilities. As information spreads outward, resonating through countless degrees of freedom, embedding traces of the event into the world. You can picture decoherence as the gentle unweaving of a fabric, threads that once lay atop one another, slowly pulled apart by the flow of information until the fabric splits into distinct strands, each one becoming its own path, its own branch, its own timeline. But the word unweaving should not be taken literally, because decoherence is not destruction and not collapse. It is simply the loss of coherence, the loss of the ability for the different possibilities to interact. In the mathematics of quantum mechanics, all possibilities remain present. All components remain part of the larger wave function, but the universe's interactions prevent them from affecting one another, prevent them from interfering, prevent them from blending. They evolve independently, silently, as separate branches of reality. This independence is what gives rise to the classical world. Macroscopic objects, chairs, trees, clouds, your own body, decohere almost instantly, because they interact with the environment constantly. Photons scatter off their surfaces, air molecules collide with them, thermal vibrations ripple through their atoms, and each interaction carries information, writing tiny records into the surroundings, records that define one outcome over another, making superpositions impossible to maintain at human scale. This is why you never see a chair in a superposition, why your hand does not blur across many positions at once. why a book does not shimmer between being open and closed. The environment is constantly recording, constantly observing, constantly entangling with every object, in ways so subtle you never sense them, and yet so powerful that they prevent any macroscopic object from remaining quantum, even for a fraction of a second. This is not because the universe makes choices, or because some hidden mechanism collapses possibilities, but because information spreads. And once information spreads, the branches separate. The idea is simple, yet profound. When a system becomes entangled with its environment, the environment carries information about which possibility has been realized, and this information prevents the other possibilities from recombining, because the environment would need to be perfectly reversed down to every microscopic detail for the interference to return. Such a reversal is possible in principle, but impossible in practice, because the environment contains trillions upon trillions of particles, each carrying a trace, a correlation, a record of what has happened. These traces are like ripples on water, expanding outward, overlapping, drifting into turbulence, impossible to gather again. And so the branches remain separate, not by force, but by the gentle, irreversible growth of information. This is why decoherence is the bridge between the quantum and classical worlds. It tells us why quantum superpositions exist, and why they vanish at human scales, why possibilities overlap and why they separate, why classical reality feels definite, even though quantum reality contains many paths. Quantum mechanics never stops allowing superpositions, never stops allowing possibilities to coexist. But decoherence ensures that most of these possibilities evolve independently, without interacting, without blending, without producing observable quantum effects. This is why the world feels classical. The classical world is simply the region where decoherence has already done its work, where branches have separated, where possibilities have crystallized into outcomes, and where information has spread too far to be brought back together. You can think of decoherence as the universe's quiet habit of keeping its possibilities separate, orderly, non-interfering, not because the universe chooses order, but because the environment records everything, and these records stabilize the branches, preventing them from interfering again. To see why decoherence leads to parallel timelines, you must imagine each branch as a path through the landscape of possibilities. Before decoherence, the quantum state is like a cloud, a blend of many paths, each one influencing the others. But after decoherence, each path evolves independently, isolated by the information the environment holds, sealed off by the records written into every interaction. Each path is now a timeline, a history, a sequence of states, a branching evolution of the universe's wave function. These are not separate universes, floating apart from one another. They are separate evolutions of the same underlying quantum reality. Different branches, different paths, different sequences of events, coexisting within the mathematics, but not interacting in any physical way. This is the conceptual heart of decoherence. It transforms quantum possibilities into classical histories, and it transforms a single, blended superposition into many distinct, non-interfering parallel timelines. You can imagine this gently, as though the universe is constantly exploring many possibilities, but the environment keeps them separate, like delicate strands drifting in quiet air. They never collide, never cross, never influence one another, because the information they contain is different, and these differences only grow with time. This is why decoherence happens constantly, everywhere, in every system, in every moment. Even now, as you listen, photons bounce from your skin, air molecules drift around you, vibrations ripple through your surroundings, and each of these interactions writes information into the environment, information that distinguishes the path you are on from the paths you are not. This constant spread of information ensures that your timeline remains stable, unique, classical. Other branches may exist in the deeper mathematical structure, but you are carried by the thread of correlations that define your experiences, the branch that holds your memories, your awareness, your quiet sense of continuity. And decoherence ensures that no other branch can influence you because their information is different from yours. Their correlations are distinct, their histories are separate, they follow their own evolution, silent, independent, unreachable. This entire process is not science fiction. It is the practical backbone of quantum physics. It explains how quantum computers maintain coherence, why they must be shielded from noise, why macroscopic objects collapse into classical states, and why our world feels definite, even though the underlying equations support many possibilities. Decoherence is everywhere, touching every atom, shaping every interaction, constantly weaving, separating, and stabilizing the branches. It is the universal process through which the quantum world blossoms into the classical world, and through which the classical world gains its solidity. It is the quiet mechanism that allows parallel timelines to exist, not as fantasy, but as a natural consequence of the physics that governs reality. And as the mind drifts through these ideas, the next thoughts rise gently. The deeper exploration of how decoherence leads to branching, how multiple futures unfold, how parallel histories remain part of the same elegant wave function, and how quantum mechanics reveals a universe far richer than everyday perception. These ideas form the flow of the next part, the continuation of this soft investigation. Decoherence does not announce itself. It does not shimmer or produce visible effects or make the world feel different in any obvious way. It moves through reality like a whisper, soft, constant, unbroken, shaping the classical world not with force, but with the quiet persistence of information spreading outward. To understand how deeply this process reaches into everything, you must picture the universe not as empty space dotted with objects, but as an ocean of interactions, a sea of particles, fields, and vibrations, constantly touching one another, constantly exchanging energy and information. There is no stillness here, no isolation except in carefully engineered laboratories, where quantum systems are shielded from noise, kept cold, kept dark, protected from the environment. Everywhere else, the environment is always present, always watching, not with intention, but with contact. Every interaction is a kind of measurement, not in the human sense, but in the physical sense, because it allows the environment to become correlated with the system, to carry information about what the system has done, or where it is, or which of its possibilities has been expressed. This flow of information is the essence of decoherence. Imagine a grain of dust suspended in sunlight to your eyes. It floats softly, gliding, almost weightless. But in the language of quantum mechanics, that dust grain is a massive object, bombarded by countless photons each second, each photon carrying information away, each collision writing a tiny record into the world. Those records are enough to destroy any quantum superposition the dust grain could have had, long before you ever notice it. A grain of dust decoheres in a fraction of a trillionth of a second. Larger objects decohere even faster, because they scatter more photons, interact with more molecules, and exhibit more thermal motion within their structures. Decoherence is not rare, it is overwhelming, inescapable, inescapably efficient. It is the quiet mechanism that forces quantum systems into classical behavior, not by changing the laws, but by letting the environment do what it always does, record everything. This recording does not require consciousness or minds or elaborate equipment. It happens because the universe contains countless degrees of freedom, and each one is ready to store a tiny trace of what has happened, even without intention. A single interaction can leave a faint imprint, but countless interactions make those imprints irreversible. Imagine a wave of possibilities, and imagine the environment as a vast canvas, every moment marking the canvas with delicate strokes, traces of each possibility, separating them, isolating them, making them distinct. This is how decoherence turns quantum possibilities into classical outcomes, not because the universe chooses one outcome, but because every possibility becomes correlated with a different state of the environment, and these environmental states become so different, so distinct, that the possibilities can no longer overlap, no longer interfere, no longer behave as parts of the same unified quantum state. The quantum superposition has not vanished, but its components have become strangers to one another, unable to share coherence, unable to recombine. Each component evolves on its own, following its own path, its own history, its own timeline. This is the splitting of realities. Not sudden, not violent, not a moment of decision, but a continuous transformation. As the environment gently nudges the components apart, pushing them into separate branches of the wave function. These branches are not universes, not bubbles of space-time, not alternate dimensions. They are simply independent evolutions of the quantum state, distinct sequences of events that arise because information has diverged, and because the environment has recorded different outcomes. To understand how decoherence leads to branching timelines, you must think in terms of correlations. A correlation is a relationship between two systems, something that links their behaviors, something that carries information from one to the other. When a system becomes correlated with its environment, the environment learns something about the system, even if only in the faintest, subtlest sense. It is this learning, this correlation, that suppresses interference. For interference to occur, the different possibilities must remain identical in the eyes of the environment. The environment must not contain any information about which possibility occurred, and no interaction can have recorded a preference. But in the real world, interactions are everywhere, and each one is a record, a trace, a correlation. Once the environment carries information, the different possibilities have become different histories. And these histories cannot overlap again. This is decoherence. It turns quantum states into records, and records into separate branches, and branches into classical outcomes. You never notice this happening because it happens at scales too small, too fast, too subtle for human senses. But the consequences are enormous. Every moment of classical reality, every object you see, every surface you touch, every thought you form, every breath you take, is possible only because decoherence has stabilized your branch, your history, your timeline. Without decoherence, the world would shimmer with quantum possibilities, interfering, overlapping, blending, with no stable classical structure to anchor experience. The solidity of the world, its definiteness, its predictability, all of it emerges because decoherence is relentless, efficient, and universal. It is the hidden mechanism that makes reality feel familiar. Even though the underlying rules support far more intricate behavior, decoherence explains why we never see quantum superpositions of people, why we never see macroscopic interference patterns, why the world does not behave like a probabilistic cloud. Quantum mechanics is always present, but decoherence transforms its possibilities into classical certainties, for every object large enough to interact with its surroundings. You can illustrate this by imagining a small object, perhaps a single molecule, left isolated inside a vacuum chamber. If the chamber is cold enough and empty enough and shielded from vibrations, the molecule may remain coherent for a long time, its quantum wave function spreading, interfering, behaving like a probability wave across the chamber. But the moment a stray photon enters the chamber, or a small vibration shakes the walls, or a gas molecule slips inside, coherence decays. The wave function begins to split, the possibilities begin to separate, and the branches begin to form. Even this molecule is too large to remain coherent for long, unless extreme measures are taken. And as you move up in scale, from molecules to dust grains, from dust grains to cells, from cells to organisms, from organisms to planets, the rate of decoherence increases dramatically. A human body decoheres almost instantly, not because the physics is different, but because the environment interacts with it endlessly, touching every atom, scattering every photon, rippling through every molecule. The environment carries so much information about you that any coherent superposition of you would be destroyed before it ever formed. And so the classical world emerges. This emergence is not magic, and not a break in the laws of physics. It is the natural behavior of quantum systems in contact with the environment. It is the reason we see a single version of events, why our choices feel definite, why our memories align with one sequence of history rather than another. Decoherence shapes reality into branches, branches into timelines, and timelines into the stable fabric of experience. In this view, parallel timelines are not fantasy. They are simply the natural consequence of how quantum states evolve. When information spreads and when possibilities become independent, the idea becomes gentler as you rest with it. Each timeline is a path, a flow of states, a sequence of correlations, and decoherence is the process that forms these paths, splitting them quietly. As the environment records distinctions, event by event, interaction by interaction, the branching does not require energy, does not consume resources, does not violate any principle. It simply reflects the fact that the universe does not erase information. It stores it, everywhere, in every particle, in every vibration, in every subtle shift of momentum. This storage of information is what prevents interference and what makes each branch its own classical reality. Even now, as you breathe, your exhaled molecules drift into the air, carrying information about you, your temperature, your movement, your presence in this place. These molecules will scatter, collide, spread outward, and the environment will be filled with tiny records, traces of your existence in this moment. These traces separate your branch from any branch where your breath was slightly different, slightly warmer, slightly cooler, slightly slower, slightly faster. Even the smallest divergence creates distinctions in the environment, and these distinctions amplify and propagate and stabilize. In this way, decoherence is infinitely patient, infinitely thorough, infinitely sensitive. It is the quiet architect of the classical world, the sculptor that carves stable timelines from the wave of possibilities. As you settle deeper into calm, you can imagine the universe as an ocean of wave functions, rippling, expanding, interacting, and decoherence as the gentle tide, breaking those waves into separate ripples, each ripple becoming a timeline, each timeline a history, each history unfolding in its own quiet expansion. Nothing about this process is mythical. Nothing about it is beyond physics. It is simply the mathematics of quantum mechanics, combined with the immensity of the environment, combined with the natural spread of information, producing a structure of reality richer than the one we see, yet perfectly consistent with the one we experience. This understanding completes the flow of ideas needed for this part, and the mind drifts naturally into the next currents of thought, the next gentle exploration, the next unfolding of the physics of parallel timelines. Information is the quiet current flowing beneath every physical process, a structure so fundamental, so deeply woven into the nature of the universe, that reality itself can be described as the evolution of information over time. Every particle, every field, every vibration carries information about what it has interacted with, what it has touched, what it has exchanged energy with, and what correlations it now shares with the rest of the world. This constant sharing, this silent weaving of correlations, is what gives the universe its shape, its texture, its remarkable ability to create history out of possibility. To understand the branching structure of information, you must picture the universe not as a collection of objects, but as an immense network of relationships, each relationship carrying tiny fragments of information, each fragment contributing to the unfolding of the present moment. In this view, a timeline is simply one coherent thread of correlations, a sequence of states connected by the way information has evolved, moment by moment, breath by breath, interaction by interaction. And parallel timelines are what appear when two sets of correlations diverge, when two sequences of information evolve in ways that no longer overlap, no longer share the same records, no longer describe the same unfolding reality. This divergence is subtle at first, almost invisible, buried in microscopic fluctuations, tiny differences in quantum states, differences in phase, in amplitude, in orientation, in entanglement. But information amplifies and spreads and grows, the way ripples expand when a single drop touches the surface of a lake. One correlation leads to another, and that one leads to another, and soon the differences that were once microscopic become macroscopic, woven into the environment beyond any possibility of reversal. The universe itself acts as the memory, recording these differences in trillions of degrees of freedom, photons scattering, air molecules drifting, vibrations propagating through matter, each one storing a trace, a tiny imprint that marks one branch apart from another. This is how two timelines become distinguishable. Not because the universe splits in a dramatic flash, not because of any sudden event, but because the information describing two possible histories grows different enough, deep enough, wide enough, that no single unified description can treat them as the same. Before this divergence, the possible paths share coherence. They overlap within the structure of the wave function. They behave like components of one state. But as information spreads, coherence fades, and the paths begin to drift apart, slowly, inevitably, until they become different branches, different timelines, different histories. This divergence occurs constantly, everywhere, in every system that interacts with its surroundings. Even the smallest interaction carries information, and even the faintest correlation can be the beginning of a branching path. A single photon bouncing off an atom stores information in its direction, its energy, its momentum, and that information is now correlated with the atom, and the environment is correlated with the photon, and the universe becomes slightly different because of it, not in any way the senses can detect, but in the structure of information. Each difference, each correlation, each record is like a small fork in the road, a subtle separation, a quiet shift in the branching structure of the wave function. And as these differences spread, the branches grow farther apart. Two timelines become distinct when the differences in their informational structure cannot be undone, when erasing those differences would require reversing every interaction, every correlation, every scattering event, every entanglement that has occurred since the initial divergence. To undo even one such divergence would require controlling the positions and momenta of trillions upon trillions of particles with absolute precision, something nature does not permit, something even the laws of physics guard carefully. Once information has been recorded, the record cannot be erased without leaving a trace, and that trace becomes another record. And the structure of the world grows more deeply differentiated. This is why branching is irreversible, and why once two timelines diverge, they remain separate forever. They no longer interfere, because interference requires identical information, identical correlations, identical histories. And once two branches differ, once the environment holds even the faintest record, interference becomes impossible. The two paths have become different stories, different evolutions of the universe, different sequences of states, occupying the same mathematical wave function, but no longer sharing coherence, no longer overlapping, no longer influencing one another. They drift apart in the abstract space of information, not in physical space, but in informational space, in the structure of correlations. This space, this vast landscape of possible states, is the stage on which timelines unfold, and the distance between two timelines is measured not in meters or seconds, but in differences of information. Two timelines are close when their informational structure is nearly identical, when only small correlations differ, when the environment has not yet encoded the divergence. Two timelines are far apart when their informational structures are deeply different, when the environment has stored vast numbers of distinctions, when their histories have taken on separate identities, woven into the fabric of the universe itself. This is why information plays the central role in parallel timelines, because branching is simply the separation of information, the point where two sets of correlations evolve independently, unable to influence each other, unable to interfere, unable to merge. Each branch becomes its own story, its own evolution, its own classical reality. To appreciate how naturally this occurs, you can imagine the flow of information as a river of correlations, spreading through the environment, rippling outward, touching everything, never stopping, never resting. In each tiny interaction, new branches begin, with probabilities defined by the wave function, but with outcomes stabilized by decoherence. Information spreads like a soft breeze, carrying distinctions across the world, embedding them in the arrangement of atoms, in the direction of scattered photons, in the gentle vibrations of matter. Even your own body is a river of information, cells exchanging chemical signals, neurons firing, proteins folding, all of it creating correlations, records, traces in the environment. Your body, your breath, your heartbeat are constantly branching because each process interacts with the environment, and each interaction leaves traces, distinctions that define your timeline, your path through the landscape of possibilities. These distinctions accumulate, grow, settle into the world, and the branch you inhabit becomes increasingly unique, increasingly separated from the other paths the universe could have taken. This is not frightening or overwhelming. It is simply the nature of information, quiet, steady, relentlessly shaping the world. It also explains why you never feel the branching, never sense the divergence, never experience the separation of possibilities. Your awareness, your memories, your thoughts are all embedded in the correlations of one branch, one sequence of information, one timeline. Even though the wave function contains many branches, your consciousness rides one, and decoherence prevents other branches from overlapping with yours because they contain different information, different histories, different correlations. You remain anchored, stabilized, held gently within your timeline, because the information of your identity is encoded in the structure of this branch, and only this branch contains the correlations that define your continuity. Parallel timelines exist, but they do not compete with the one you experience. They do not threaten it, they do not intrude upon it, because their information is different, and the environment keeps the branches separate, isolated, quiet. You are not split, you are simply one informational structure among many, one coherent thread through the quantum landscape, one classical history stabilized by decoherence and the flow of information. And this is why quantum histories, when they become distinct, are considered separate timelines. Because each history is a different evolution of information, a different path through the vast landscape of states, a different unfolding of interactions. Each timeline is a complete structure, containing everything needed to define a world, a past, a present, a future. The wave function does not choose a single timeline, it contains them all, and decoherence separates them by locking different information into different branches. You travel along one branch, the one whose information contains your consciousness, your memories, your sense of self. And while other branches unfold silently, they are not accessible, because their information is incompatible with yours. Their histories are not the ones encoded in your structure. This understanding brings a soft clarity, a recognition that parallel timelines are not chaotic, not fantastical, but deeply structured, rooted in the flow of information itself. Flowing naturally from the rules of quantum mechanics, information diverges and timelines diverge. Information stabilizes and timelines become classical. Information spreads and timelines become separate. This is the branching structure of reality, quiet, inevitable, mathematically beautiful, and woven gently into the nature of the universe. And with this understanding, your thoughts drift softly into the next constellation of ideas, toward the deeper question of identity, and what it means to be oneself, embedded in one branch, while the quantum world supports many. The branching structure of information becomes easier to understand when you picture the universe as a vast, ever-evolving tapestry. A tapestry woven not from threads of matter or energy, but from correlations, tiny relationships that link one system to another, quiet patterns that form the foundation of everything that exists. Every moment, every interaction, every exchange of photons or vibrations adds new threads to this tapestry, new correlations, new information about what has happened, how it happened, and which possibilities unfolded. None of these threads can be removed without leaving a trace. None of the patterns can be unwoven without disruption. And because of this, the tapestry naturally branches, separating into different regions where the information has evolved differently, quietly forming distinct timelines. To see this more deeply, you must imagine information flowing through the universe the way water flows through a river delta, splitting, branching, rejoining, splitting again, each branch carrying different impurities, different shapes, different histories of where it has traveled. But unlike water, informational branches cannot rejoin once they diverge, because their histories become embedded in the environment, recorded by countless interactions, and these records prevent the merging. Once information diverges, the branches remain separate, quietly evolving on their own, each one following a distinct path through the possibility space of quantum states. This is the heart of parallel timelines, not duplicate universes, but duplicate histories, duplicate sequences of information, each one isolated by the environment's memory, each one unable to interfere with the others. To appreciate how subtle these branches can be, imagine a simple quantum system, a particle with two possible states, perhaps two spin orientations or two positions on a small scale. Before decoherence, the particle exists in a superposition, a mathematical blend of both possibilities, a wave function describing many potential futures, all intertwined, all overlapping within the quantum state. But the moment the environment becomes aware of the system, even in the faintest sense, even through a single scattering event, the superposition begins to unfold into branches. One branch carries the record of the particle interacting in one state, another branch carries the record of the interaction in the other state, and each branch begins to evolve independently, isolated by the environment's knowledge, unable to recombine, unable to create interference. From this simple divergence, an entire structure of branching timelines begins. Every further interaction takes the system deeper into its branch, carrying the informational differences forward, embedding them more deeply into the world, until the two branches are separated by trillions of correlations, completely independent, completely distinct. And yet, in the deeper structure of the wave function, both branches remain present, both histories continue to exist, both timelines are encoded in the quantum state of the universe. They do not interact. They do not influence one another. They cannot communicate, but they coexist quietly, mathematically, as separate evolutions of information. Now extend this idea outward, beyond a single particle, beyond a small system, to the entire environment, to the vast sea of interactions happening around you every moment. Each photon scattering off your skin, each molecule drifting through the air, each vibration rippling through matter, carries information about you, about where you are, about what you are doing. These interactions create correlations, and those correlations define your timeline, the sequence of states that record your existence, moment after moment. And because the environment writes these records continuously, your timeline becomes more and more distinct from any other possible history, more stabilized, more classical, more anchored by the flow of information. Even small variations would require different records, different correlations, different environmental traces, and those differences would create branches, paths in the wave function where reality unfolds differently. These paths may differ only slightly at first, microscopic fluctuations, tiny changes in quantum states, but information amplifies and spreads and grows until the divergence is macroscopic and the branches become different timelines, each evolving silently, each carrying its own coherent story. This amplification of information is one of the most important features of the branching structure of reality. A tiny difference in a quantum event can grow into vast differences in the future, because the environment spreads information rapidly, broadcasting distinctions across billions of particles, embedding them into the world in ways that cannot be undone. A single photon scattering differently, a single atom vibrating at a slightly different phase, a single environmental molecule shifting its energy by the smallest amount. These differences ripple outward, touching countless systems, creating a cascade of correlations, and over time, forming branches that differ in profound ways. This sensitivity is not chaos. It is simply the nature of information, the way correlations propagate, the way the universe records everything that happens. And because the universe records so much, because the environment has so many degrees of freedom, the branching structure is vast, rich, dense, and layered with detail beyond imagination. To see why timelines diverge, consider the nature of distinguishability. Two quantum states are distinguishable when the environment contains enough information to tell them apart. When some part of the world has become correlated with one state rather than the other, when different histories lead to different environmental records. Distinguishability is not about what an observer could measure, but about what the environment has recorded, about what has been entangled with what, about which correlations exist and which do not. Once the environment holds different information for different possibilities, the two possible histories have become different branches, irreversible, non-interfering, separate timelines. The distance between these timelines is measured not in space, but in information, in the structure of the correlations that define each branch. If two branches share most of their correlations, they are close in the informational sense, and their histories differ only slightly. If two branches differ in vast numbers of correlations, if the environment holds trillions of differences between them, they are far apart, differing histories that could never again overlap, never again influence one another. These distances are not visible, but they are real, embedded in the structure of the wave function, mapping out a landscape of parallel timelines, each timeline a path through this landscape, a sequence of states linked by correlations, unchangeable and irreversible. Imagine that landscape, vast and intricate, shaped by the flow of information, filled with branching paths that grow more distinct with every moment. Each timeline is like a root in an ever-expanding tree, extending outward as information diverges, splitting again and again, not in space, but in the evolution of correlations. You exist along one of these routes, one of these informational paths, one coherent sequence of states stabilized by decoherence and environmental records. Other routes may begin from the same point, but they diverge quickly, becoming separate histories, separate structures, separate timelines with their own logic, their own evolution, their own unfolding of events. This is why your timeline feels singular, why your experience seems unified, why your sense of self is continuous, because the information defining you is carried by one branch, and decoherence isolates that branch from all the others. You are not split across branches. You are defined by the correlations in a specific branch, the one that contains your memories, your awareness, your identity. Other branches may contain versions of events where small things unfolded differently, where microscopic fluctuations cascaded into different outcomes, where different correlations led to different histories. But those branches do not influence yours, because their information is different, and decoherence has separated them, quietly, inevitably, completely. They drift through the landscape of possibility, just as your branch does, but their histories do not touch your own. This understanding brings a gentle tranquility, because it reveals a universe where many possibilities coexist, but only one path holds the structure that defines your presence, your continuity. Parallel timelines are not competing realities. They are simply different informational evolutions, each one given form by decoherence, each one allowed by the mathematics of quantum mechanics, each one a whisper of what the universe could be, quietly unfolding beyond your view. And when you let this idea settle into your mind, the structure becomes softer, calmer, more intuitive. Information diverges and timelines diverge. Information separates and coherence fades. Information spreads and branches form. This is the branching structure of information, the quiet architecture of parallel timelines, the way the universe allows many histories to unfold within a single wave function without ever blending them, without ever allowing their differences to disappear. It is a system of breathtaking complexity, yet it operates with gentleness, with inevitability, with a kind of silent grace. And as this thought completes, your mind drifts naturally toward the next question, the next soft mystery, the nature of identity, and how the self persists within a branching universe. Identity feels singular, continuous, unbroken, as though you are a single thread moving through time, carrying memories, perceptions, intentions from one moment to the next. This sense of continuity is so natural that it seems obvious, fundamental, a basic truth of experience. But in the deeper structure of the universe, in the quiet, branching architecture of quantum information, identity is not a separate substance, not a soul, not an object floating through time. Identity is a pattern, a configuration of information held together by correlations, a structure that persists because the environment stabilizes it, encoding your history in countless interactions, records, impressions, written softly into the world. You exist as a set of correlations, a richly detailed informational network, linking the neurons in your brain, the signals in your body, the memories you carry, and the environment around you. Every moment of your life is supported by this structure, and the continuity you experience is the continuity of this pattern, flowing through time, held intact by the physical processes that keep your brain cohesive, your body stable, your interactions consistent. In a branching universe, identity is not shattered, not divided, not duplicated in any way you could feel, because your awareness, your consciousness, your sense of self are bound to one coherent pattern of information. Your experiences form a single timeline, because the information that defines you is encoded in one branch, and decoherence isolates that branch from all the others, preventing interference, preventing confusion, preventing any blending of histories. Even if quantum events can lead to branching, your conscious identity follows one thread, one unfolding sequence of informational states, one path through the space of possibility. It does not matter how many branches exist in the deeper wave function, because your memories exist only in one of them. Memory is the anchor of identity, the quiet chain that links now to before, and memory is written in physical states, in the arrangement of neurons, in the structure of synapses, in patterns of activity. These physical structures decohere almost instantly, making their state classical, stable, anchored to a specific timeline. You cannot remember something from another branch, because those memories do not exist in the physical configuration of your brain. They are not encoded in the correlations that define your identity. Your continuity is built from the information embedded in your branch, and that information evolves smoothly, predictably, in the classical limit. So even though the universe may contain many branches, your identity remains singular, because only one branch carries the information that makes you who you are. This idea can feel abstract, but it is deeply comforting, because it means that your sense of self is intact, coherent, even in a universe where parallel timelines are allowed by physics. You are not divided across branches, you are defined by them, or rather, by one of them, the one whose correlations contain your memories and your awareness. But identity is more subtle than memory alone, because identity is also shaped by the structure of the brain, the relations among its parts, the continuity of experience from instant to instant. The brain is a classical object, built from trillions of interacting particles, each entangled with the environment, each decohering so quickly that quantum superpositions never develop at the scale of thought. This means your consciousness does not split in the quantum sense, because the physical substrate that generates consciousness is already classical, already decohered, already stabilized into one branch. From moment to moment, the brain evolves as a classical dynamical system, drifting through states in a way that maintains continuity of awareness. You experience thought as a flow because the underlying physical process is a flow, a continuous unfolding of classical states sculpted by countless interactions. Your identity is this flow, this self-sustaining pattern, this quiet cascade of correlated states. And even though the quantum world is branching underneath, the branching does not create multiple conscious copies of you, because the information that defines your awareness remains in one branch, while the others evolve separately, carrying different physical states, different environmental records, different informational patterns. Two branches cannot share the same identity, because identity is not a copyable thing. It is a pattern embedded in the matter of one branch, a structure carried by one coherent set of correlations. If a branch diverges, the divergence creates a different pattern, but not another you, not another awareness that overlaps with the one you experience. Each branch contains its own informational structures, its own history, its own identity. But these identities do not compete, do not interact, do not influence one another. They are simply parallel patterns, parallel structures, parallel sequences of correlations evolving in the quantum landscape. You live inside one pattern, one thread, one classical sequence, and that is why your experience is unified, continuous, singular. To understand this more deeply, consider what it means for identity to feel continuous. Continuity is not a property of a soul. It is a relationship between states, a similarity between one moment and the next, a set of correlations that evolve smoothly through time. If the pattern of your brain at one moment resembles the pattern at the next moment, in a way that preserves memories, intentions, perception, then identity is experienced as continuous. It does not require any abstract entity beyond the physical structure. It does not require anything that exists separate from matter, because the structure itself, the information contained in the brain, is enough to define the feeling of being you. Even in a branching universe, the continuity is preserved because the brain's physical state evolves along one stable branch, anchored to one set of environmental correlations. If another branch diverges, with different microscopic events, different interactions, different outcomes, that branch contains a different physical state, a different informational pattern, a different potential identity, but not yours. Your identity is tied to one pattern, and that pattern moves forward along one timeline, independent of all others. This is why the self feels singular. Even though the universe contains many possibilities, identity is not a thing that exists in multiple timelines. Identity is a structure that exists in exactly one, defined by the correlations that shape your brain in that particular history. And because the environment decoheres your brain continuously, your branch becomes highly stable, highly isolated, making your identity feel solid, grounded, unbroken. In fact, identity in a branching universe is more stable than in a purely classical world, because decoherence locks the branch into place, preserving its informational structure, preventing interference, shielding it from blending with nearby quantum possibilities. The environment is constantly reinforcing your identity, not deliberately, but through the natural flow of information, through interactions that create a vast network of correlations. Every sound you hear, every texture you touch, every photon that reflects from your skin establishes additional correlations, additional records, further embedding your existence into the physical world. These records stabilize your branch, making your timeline uniquely your own, making your identity robust, unchangeable by events in other branches. No other branch contains the correlations that define you, and this is why you cannot jump between branches, cannot feel their presence, cannot sense their histories. They are informationally incompatible, and decoherence prevents any blending. Your timeline is your memory, your identity, your awareness, and these things are encoded physically, with enormous stability in the matter around you. This is why your identity persists smoothly, even as microscopic possibilities branch quietly beneath the surface. Identity in a branching universe is not fragile, not threatened, not something that splits or duplicates. It is a pattern that remains stable because the environment makes it stable. It is a thread that remains continuous because decoherence isolates it. It is a structure that persists because physics supports its persistence. This understanding can bring a deep calm, a reassurance that your selfhood is not diluted by branching, not weakened by quantum possibility, but instead protected by the very mechanisms that allow parallel timelines to exist. You are the continuity of your experience, the coherence of your memories, the structure of your physical brain, the correlations that shape your timeline. And as this realization settles, you begin to feel the gentle shift toward deeper questions, toward the idea of how identity responds to variation, how small changes in events shape different versions of outcomes, how branching relates to possibility, and how the self remains singular even when reality supports many paths. These ideas form the quiet stepping stone to the next part, the continuation of this calm exploration into identity across parallel timelines. Identity in a branching universe becomes clearer when you recognize that the self is not a fixed object, not a single point, not an essence that drifts untouched through time, but a structure, a living, changing, self-maintaining pattern shaped by physics, rooted in matter, held together by correlations that persist through the flow of states. Even in a purely classical world, identity would not be an isolated thing. It would be the continuity of brain states, the persistence of memory, the stability of the neural architecture that supports awareness. In a branching quantum world, identity is still this continuity, but stabilized even more strongly, because decoherence constantly reinforces the structure of your branch, locking your memories into a specific sequence of informational states, isolating your awareness within one timeline, one thread of correlations. The idea that branching creates multiple versions of events can feel strange, but the strangeness fades when you focus on what identity actually is. Identity is not the collection of all possible outcomes. Identity is the pattern that emerges on one branch, the branch where your body exists, your neurons fire, your memories form, your awareness arises. Other branches, even those that differ only slightly, contain their own physical patterns, their own trajectories of matter and energy, their own histories of brain states. But these patterns are not you. They are simply other possible versions of physical events, evolving in parallel, decohered and informationally separate. Your sense of being yourself, your inner continuity, your unique point of view, exists only in the physical configuration of one branch, because only one branch contains the correlations that define your particular stream of consciousness. This is why the self feels so deeply singular, because the environment continuously stabilizes the physical state of your brain, preventing any quantum overlap with other branches, ensuring that your experience follows one classical path, one unfolding of matter, one sequence of neural activity. Everything that makes you who you are, your memories, your desires, your emotions, your perception of the present moment, is encoded physically, and those physical encodings decohere instantly, pinning them to one branch, making your identity inseparable from the timeline you inhabit. But to truly appreciate this, you must consider what gives rise to memory itself. Memory is not a mysterious imprint. It is a stable pattern in the synaptic structure of the brain, a network of strengthened or weakened connections, a quiet architecture built through experience and sustained by the chemistry and physics of neurons. Each memory is a configuration, a particular arrangement of molecules, ions, proteins, and electrical states. And these configurations interact with the environment constantly, decohering at unimaginable speed, securing themselves to one branch, anchoring your history in a way no other branch shares. If another branch contains a slightly different version of events, then the synaptic state will be different, the memory trace will be different. The informational structure that gives rise to identity will be different. You only experience the memory tracks written into your branch because your awareness is supported by these physical configurations and not by any version that exists elsewhere. Consciousness emerges from this one coherent physical system, and because decoherence isolates it, your identity remains tied to this system alone. You are the continuity of this branch's informational structure, and no other branch shares the same correlations, the same patterns, the same unfolding. This continuity is the reason identity feels so deeply stable, even though the quantum world beneath is full of possibility. Identity is not threatened by branching, because identity is not spread across branches, it is defined within one. This understanding carries a gentle comfort, because it shows that branching does not multiply the self. It simply describes a universe where many histories evolve, but only one contains the self you know, the one carried through time by the particular configuration of your brain. Even the idea of different versions of outcomes, the possibility that small variations in quantum events could lead to different results, does not undermine your identity, because identity is a pattern that persists across moments, and that pattern is not altered by the existence of other possible patterns. Your identity is the specific arrangement of physical states in this branch, and only this branch. Another branch may contain a version of events where a tiny difference occurred, a neuron fired at a different time, a molecule moved a different way, a memory formed differently, but the resulting informational structure would define a different identity, not a competing one, not a dilution of yours, simply a separate structure evolving separately. In this way, identity across parallel timelines behaves much like identity across different individuals, each one a distinct pattern, each one evolving independently, each one shaped by its own history, its own correlations, its own unfolding of physical states. Parallel timelines do not create multiple yous that share awareness. They create multiple histories that share a starting point, but diverge into unique patterns, each carrying its own identity. Your identity is a structure that belongs to one history, one branch, one coherent evolution of information. This means the feeling of subjective continuity is not an illusion, it is a physical phenomenon, a result of how the brain evolves through classical states, how decoherence stabilizes those states, and how the environment ensures that the flow of information remains consistent over time. Identity persists because the laws of physics support its persistence, because decoherence protects the pattern, because the environment isolates the branch. Even the smallest detail of your experience, a passing thought, a fragment of memory, a subtle feeling, is encoded physically and becomes part of the structure that defines your existence. This structure is what you experience as I, and no other branch contains exactly that structure, because even the smallest divergence produces a different pattern, a different evolution, a different self. Identity is not a ghost drifting between timelines. Identity is the quiet stability of one pattern of information, held in place by the physics of decoherence, protected from interference, anchored to one branch. And in this sense, identity in a branching universe is remarkably stable, more stable in fact than if the world were purely classical, because decoherence locks the branch into place with overwhelming precision, ensuring that your memories and experiences remain part of one coherent history. Your timeline is not chosen, it is stabilized by the physics of the environment, by the endless flow of interactions, by the constant writing of information into the world. Each moment, each breath, each heartbeat is encoded in the environment as correlations, as records, as informational imprints, and these imprints reinforce your identity, not by intention, but simply as a natural consequence of physics. Understanding this brings a deeper sense of peace, because it means that even in a universe rich with possibility, your experience is stable, continuous, uninterrupted, rooted in the specific correlations of your branch. You do not drift between timelines. You exist firmly within one, because identity cannot be separated from the physical states that encode it. This idea becomes even more soothing when you consider how the brain's dynamics evolve, each moment building upon the previous one, each memory linked to the last, each perception tied to a network of past experiences. This chain is unbroken, not because the universe selects one path, but because decoherence makes all the other paths incompatible with yours. Your brain's physical state in this moment depends on the exact pattern of states in the previous moment, and that pattern depends on the moment before, and so on, all the way down the chain of time. This chain exists only on one branch, the branch where your memories actually formed, the branch where your awareness actually flows, the branch where your identity has been recorded through the entire course of your life. This is why the self feels so continuous, so grounded, so certain. It is because your identity is the physical continuity of this one branch, woven through time by the ongoing evolution of information. Other branches may exist, with different events, different outcomes, different histories, but none of them contain the pattern that is you. Because none of them contain the same correlations, the same memories, the same informational structure. Your identity is not in the branching. Your identity is in the continuity of one branch. And once this settles into your understanding, the idea of parallel timelines no longer disrupts the sense of self, but reveals the quiet elegance of a universe where possibility is rich. Yet identity remains stable, unbroken, anchored to one coherent thread. And as this thought fades softly, the mind begins to drift toward the next question, the next gentle investigation, the nature of interaction between timelines and why. Even though many branches exist, none can ever touch or cross or influence the one you inhabit. There is a quiet question that sits at the heart of every discussion about parallel timelines, a question that feels simple on the surface, yet grows deeper the longer you sit with it. If parallel branches truly unfold beside one another, if every decohered history persists as a distinct evolution of the universe's information, then why do they feel so impossibly separate? Why does nothing in one branch ever leak into another? Why is there no shimmer of interference at the scale of human experience? No crossing, no merging, no whisper carried from one version of events into another. To understand this, to explore it slowly and without urgency, you first have to remember what a branch actually is. A branch is not a place, not a location that sits beside yours like a neighboring planet, not another universe layered over this one like a second sheet of paper. A branch is only a configuration of information, a history that has unfolded in a precise pattern, a specific sequence of correlations that has become distinct from all other possibilities. And once two histories become distinct enough, once the correlations no longer overlap, they drift apart in a way that is deeper than distance. It is a separation encoded into the very mathematics of quantum theory. The simplest way to imagine this, without forcing metaphors, is to think of the universe as an enormous web of relationships. The arrangement of every particle, every field, every correlation forms the woven structure of your timeline. When something in that web changes, when a measurement occurs, or when a microscopic fluctuation amplifies into something macroscopic, the pattern of information drifts in a new direction. Another branch follows the alternative pattern, and the two webs slowly diverge, each one recording its own history, each one accumulating its own set of correlations. This divergence is subtle at first, so subtle that at the microscopic scale, tiny branches could in principle interfere. They could overlap, like faint ripples meeting on a still pond. But as soon as the environment gets involved, as soon as air molecules, photons, vibrations, and thermal noise begin to record the outcome, the branches peel away from one another, not in space, but in informational structure. This peel, this widening gap, is why interaction becomes impossible, because interaction requires coherence, and coherence requires a shared, overlapping informational pattern. Imagine two histories that differ by a single photon scattered differently. Then imagine that photon interacting with billions of air molecules, each collision spreading the difference further, each change cascading outward, until the two branches have become so deeply distinct that there is no longer any meaningful overlap. The universe cannot make them speak to each other, because there is no shared structure left to transmit the message. It is not that the branches are forbidden from interacting, it is that they become incompatible, like two melodies drifting so far apart that no note aligns, two waves with frequencies so mismatched that no interference pattern can form. The mathematics behind this is simple and gentle. The wave function continues evolving smoothly, but its components become orthogonal. Orthogonality is a soft word, but in physics it means something absolute. It means two states have no overlap, no shared amplitude, no possibility of interaction. Two orthogonal branches cannot interfere because they occupy distinct directions in the universe's state space, directions that never cross, so distant, not in space but in structure, that communication becomes physically meaningless. And this separation happens incredibly quickly, far faster than anything we can intuitively imagine. A speck of dust undergoing decoherence in warm air loses coherence in about 10 to the minus 31 seconds. So fast that the branching becomes irreversible before the dust even completes a fraction of its vibration. At the human scale, with trillions upon trillions of interacting particles, the decoherence rate is unimaginably faster. So fast that the divergence between branches becomes complete long before any brain could form a conscious thought. This is why memories never mix across branches, why versions of events stay isolated, why each timeline flows forward as if it is the only one. It is not loneliness and not separation in the emotional sense. It is simply the physics of information, the calm, unavoidable mathematics of a universe that keeps each history self-contained. When people imagine parallel timelines interacting, they often imagine tunnels or rifts or bridges. But all of these pictures are rooted in the idea of space, and branches are not spatially arranged. They are not elsewhere. They are not out of reach because they are far away. They are out of reach because the structure of information that defines your branch is not compatible with theirs. Your branch is one trajectory through the universe's enormous configuration space, and another branch is a different trajectory, curving away from yours the moment their histories cease to match. Think of information as the coordinates of existence, and branching as paths through those coordinates. Once two paths diverge, they trace distinct curves, and no physical mechanism exists to bend one path back into the other. Even the basic laws of physics prevent this. Time evolution in quantum mechanics is linear, reversible, and unitary. It preserves orthogonality, meaning that once two paths diverge, once they become distinguishable, no lawful evolution can collapse them back together. This is why branches never recombine. Why they drift apart like shadows cast from the same object under different lights, similar at first glance, but impossible to merge into a single outline. The formalism doesn't forbid interference entirely. It simply limits it to tiny systems, objects so small that the environment has not yet recorded their differences, systems isolated enough that their histories remain coherent. A pair of electrons can interfere, atoms can, small clusters can. But as soon as the environment knows the difference, even faintly, the tender coherence evaporates, and microscopic superpositions dissolve into macroscopic branches. Human experience sits unimaginably far beyond this threshold. Your thoughts, your memories, your actions, your entire experience of reality are bathed in constant environmental interaction, so thoroughly entangled with the world around you, that any microscopic uncertainty washes away into distinct histories before it ever reaches your awareness. This is why interaction between timelines stays microscopic, why the interference experiments physicists perform require such delicate isolation, why quantum computers must be shielded, chilled, protected from noise, because noise is the world's way of enforcing classicality, of insisting that branches remain separate. This natural policing of coherence is not aggressive. It is simply the way information behaves. The universe does not allow branches to interfere at the human scale because such interference would require reversing immense amounts of environmental entanglement. A reversal so vast that it would require undoing the physical history of entire regions of space. To interact with another branch, you would need to erase the difference between them, and the difference is woven into everything. Every scattered photon, every molecular vibration, every tiny correlation encoded in thermal motion would have to be undone, rewound, reset. The informational cost of such a reversal is beyond astronomical. It is physically impossible, not because the universe prohibits it, but because the universe has already written its record, and that record cannot simply be overwritten. This brings us to another quiet truth. The impossibility of interaction is the price of classical stability. It is the reason you experience one timeline cleanly, without fuzziness, without mixing, without ghostly interference from alternate outcomes. If branch interaction were easy, your experience of reality would be unstable. You would never have a stable sense of self, never trust a memory, never rely on a sequence of events. Instead, you inhabit a branch that remains coherent with itself, because the universe maintains that coherence by isolating each branch from its siblings. This isolation is not a wall and not a barrier. It is simply a natural consequence of the widening informational gulf between histories. When two branches diverge, their differences accumulate, branching again and again as the moments unfold, until the branches become so distinct that all possibility of interference has faded into nothing. At that point, each branch becomes its own classical reality, a self-contained evolution, a complete version of events that no longer touches the others. This is the deep, gentle reason why parallel timelines do not interact, not through will, not through force, but through the quiet inevitability of decoherence. Yet understanding this separation brings another insight, an insight subtle and calming. Interaction is impossible, but existence is shared. All branches arise from the same universal wave function, the same underlying structure of possibility. So even though no branch can touch another, they all unfold within the same mathematical tapestry, different threads, never crossing, yet woven into the same limitless fabric. A branching universe is not chaotic, not fragmented, and not disconnected. It is simply rich, so rich that every possibility finds its own quiet space to unfold. In this calm realization, you can rest, knowing that your timeline is complete, stable, self-contained, and gently carried forward by the same laws that shape every other branch. And slowly, without rushing, the idea settles. Parallel timelines do not interact, because interaction requires coherence, and coherence requires sameness, and sameness fades the moment histories diverge. Timeline separation is not an edge, not a wall, but a widening of paths, each path following its own logic, its own sequence, its own unfolding. And in the soft drift of this understanding, the universe feels quieter, more organized, more serene, a place where every possibility has room to breathe, and every branch flows forward in its own gentle direction. When you think of interaction, the mind naturally imagines movement across a surface, objects approaching, touching, exchanging something tangible. But parallel timelines are not arranged in space, and because they are not arranged in space, the idea of interaction itself must be understood differently. To ask whether two branches can influence one another is really to ask whether two distinct informational histories can regain overlap, whether two diverged patterns can somehow align again or share a structure or find a common configuration that allows interference to return. And the quiet, gentle answer is that they cannot, not because the universe prohibits it, but because the difference between branches grows too rich, too complex, too deeply woven into the environment. At the heart of this is the nature of decoherence, not as a sudden event, but as a continuous flow of information from system to environment, a constant leaking outward of microscopic distinctions until the environment encodes those distinctions irreversibly. Take a simple example, a tiny dust particle suspended in air. Its quantum state begins as a cloud of possibilities, positions slightly uncertain, phases spread delicately across space, but every second it collides with trillions of air molecules. Each collision records a faint imprint of the dust particle's position, a tiny trace of information carried away in thermal motion. After only a fraction of a second, the environment contains so many records, so many scattered confirmations of one definite position, that any alternative position becomes mathematically incompatible. Those incompatible alternatives are not destroyed. They simply continue as separate branches. Branches that no longer share the same correlations. branches that no longer have access to the same environmental memory. And because the environment holds so much information, its records cannot be undone, not in practice and not in principle. This impossibility forms the core of Section 5, the quiet, analytical reason why branches do not interact. To merge two branches, you would need to unwind a staggering quantity of entanglement. You would need to erase every scattered photon, every air molecule collision, every vibration in every surface, every trace that has rippled outward since the moment the branches diverged. But information, once distributed across the environment, becomes unreachable, not because it is lost, but because retrieving it would require reversing the state of systems far beyond control. Imagine trying to unring a bell, but the bell is the entire atmosphere, and every vibration, every motion, every interaction has already spread across billions of particles everywhere. The law governing this is simple. The universe evolves unitarily, meaning it preserves information, meaning nothing can be erased. But this same law also ensures that information disperses, spreading outward into countless degrees of freedom, until it becomes effectively impossible to gather again. This is why branches cannot meet. They drift apart because their informational landscapes drift apart, and there is no physical pathway for those landscapes to realign. Even in the smallest systems, a single interference experiment requires extraordinary precision. Electrons must be kept free from noise, atoms must be isolated in vacuum chambers, quantum computers must be cooled to nearly absolute zero, shielded from every disturbance, because a single environmental interaction can destroy coherence. Now compare that to the human scale, a scale drenched in thermal noise, bathed in photons, saturated with interactions. Your brain, your body, your surroundings are constantly exchanging information with the environment, so thoroughly and so overwhelmingly that any potential branch interaction is washed away instantly before even the faintest overlap could form. This is why parallel versions of events remain independent, not because something prevents them from touching, but because the universe has no mechanism for resynchronizing their histories, no route to reconstruct the lost coherence. To interact with another branch, you would need to cause two different histories to evolve into the same configuration. But different histories contain different records, and those records are woven into matter itself, into positions, into energies, into correlations so numerous that no physical process can undo them. Even extreme thought experiments fail. Suppose you build a machine capable of isolating a small system perfectly, suspended away from all interactions. Even then, the rest of the branch you inhabit would still retain the environmental history, a sprawling web of correlations that no local device could reverse. To reunite two branches, the entire universe would have to cooperate, every photon, every molecule, every degree of freedom, all aligned to erase their recorded distinctions. But physics does not allow such a thing, because unitary evolution preserves those distinctions forever, even as they become inaccessible. Even as they spread across vast regions of configuration space. This is why branch interaction remains confined to the tiniest scales, to systems so small that the environment has not recorded their state, to systems delicately protected, shielded, held in a purity of isolation that is almost unnatural. On human scales, decoherence wins instantly, and branches pull apart before even a thought has time to form. This separation also answers a subtle question. If branches cannot interact, why can small systems interfere after branching? Why can an electron recombine paths after being split? Why can quantum superpositions be maintained at all? The answer is simple and soft. Before the environment has learned the difference, before any record has spread outward, two paths still share an overlap, still maintain coherence, still belong to a single quantum state. But the moment the environment encodes a clue, even a faint one, coherence collapses, not in the sense of destruction, but in the sense of being dispersed, spread so widely that the paths become distinguishable. Distinguishability, not measurement, is what ends interference, because distinguishability means there is information somewhere in the universe, however tiny, that marks the difference between histories. Once that information exists, even in principle, interference dies, and the branches split, each one carrying forward a separate trail of correlations. This is the scientific heart of parallel timelines, their independence, their isolation, their calm separation through the natural behavior of information. And now, with this understanding deepening gently, another insight emerges. Even if interaction is impossible, connection of a different kind remains. Branches share the same universal wave function. They unfold as different components of the same grand mathematical structure, not strangers to each other, but siblings of the same origin, born from the same laws, the same initial condition, the same unfolding possibility. They never mix, but they also never exist outside the same overarching reality, a reality far larger than any single branch can experience, a reality woven from all possible paths. This gives rise to a gentle, philosophical truth. Branches cannot speak to one another, yet they are not meaningless to one another. They form the backdrop of possibility, the shadowed space of what might have been, the deeper structure that gives meaning to choice and to uncertainty, and to the very idea of potential futures. So when you think about interaction, it helps to think not in terms of physical exchange, but in terms of the constraints of information and the calm, unwavering laws that protect the coherence of each branch. Your timeline remains stable, not because the universe isolates you, but because the universe preserves every record, every correlation, and by preserving them, prevents any two diverged histories from becoming one again. In this sense, parallel timelines resemble diverging trajectories in a vast, multidimensional landscape, not crossing, not touching, each one following its own curve, its own momentum, its own evolving pattern. And even though they never meet, they all exist within the same mathematical space, all part of the same universal wave function, all outcomes allowed by the same laws of physics. This is what makes branch independence both absolute and gentle. It is not a barrier built from force, but a separation born from the natural drift of information, a drift that cannot be reversed, because the universe cannot unwrite its own memory. The impossibility of interaction is therefore not a limit, but a quiet reassurance, a sign of stability, a reflection of how the universe protects the coherence of each lived experience. Your timeline unfolds cleanly, not because others do not exist, but because the universe preserves the integrity of your branch, just as it preserves every other, and slowly, softly, this understanding settles. Parallel timelines do not interact because their histories diverge faster than anything can keep up, because information spreads outward too quickly to be gathered, because the environment protects classicality by scattering records into countless degrees of freedom, because unitarity preserves those records forever, because reversibility exists only in the equations and not in the physical world we inhabit. The branches drift apart, quietly, inevitably, each one stable, each one whole, each one carrying its own version of events. And in this calm recognition you can rest, knowing that your timeline is complete, self-contained, and gently supported by the structure of quantum theory. No ghosts of alternate histories intrude, no echoes bleed through. No confusion arises from parallel outcomes. Your branch is yours, fully, cleanly, and without interference. A single, continuous unfolding, carried by the quiet laws of a universe more rich and structured than it first seems. There is a quiet moment in every life, a gentle pause, where you look back at the path you have taken and wonder softly whether things could have unfolded differently, whether another version of events rested only a breath away, hidden in the landscape of possibility. And in that moment, you feel the weight and the lightness of choice, the way a single decision can shape years, the way tiny variations ripple into outcomes, and you wonder, not with urgency, but with a calm curiosity, how physics understands this experience, how the laws of nature, so structured, so mathematical, so precise, can allow for something as fluid as possibility, as branching futures, as paths not taken. To explore this, you have to move slowly, letting the ideas drift in one at a time, like particles settling in still water. The first thing to understand is that physics does not treat time as a fixed rail, nor as a river carrying you helplessly, but as a dimension woven into the structure of the universe, a dimension that connects states, one after another, in an ordered chain. And yet, this chain does not force a single future. It simply shows how states evolve, how information rearranges, how interactions build correlations, how events propagate forward. But within this evolution, within the mathematics that carries the universe from one moment to the next, there is room for branching. room for multiple possible continuations, room for a landscape of futures that fan outward, not in chaos, but in an organized, lawful way. This is where the idea of possibility becomes gentle and real, not a fantasy, not an escape, but an intrinsic feature of the quantum world. Quantum theory never predicts a single outcome with certainty. It predicts a range, a distribution, a structured spread of what could happen, each outcome weighted, each one allowed, each one embedded within the universal wave function. And when the environment interacts with a quantum system, when those possibilities decohere, they do not collapse into one singular thread. They diverge, they branch, they unfold into parallel histories, each carrying its own version of the event, each one a continuation of the universe's lawful evolution. In this sense, the future is not single, it is layered, softly layered, a set of paths that all sit side by side, even if only one of them becomes your lived experience. And this brings us to choice, a word that feels intimate, personal, rooted in consciousness, yet tied deeply to the physics of branching. People often imagine choice as a turning of the self, a movement of will through the world, selecting one future and discarding others. But in the branching picture, choice is something quieter, something less forceful, and more structural. What you call a choice is the unfolding of your brain's physical state, your memories, your impulses, your perceptions, your reasoning, all rippling through the neural architecture until one pattern stabilizes and becomes the action you take. And the physics of that process, the microscopic fluctuations, the thermal noise, the quantum randomness in neural signaling, the chaotic sensitivity of complex systems, all of that allows multiple possible outcomes. Each outcome corresponds to a different arrangement of neural activity, a different set of correlations, a different continuity of your identity. And as decoherence spreads these differences through the environment, the future splits, quietly, organically, with each branch containing a version of you who acted in a coherent way, consistent with their own internal history. This means that choice is not erased in a branching universe. It is preserved, deepened, multiplied, because choice becomes the structure that differentiates timelines, the feature that distinguishes histories, the mechanism by which one branch diverges from another. Your experience of choosing, your sense of selecting among possibilities, is not an illusion. It is a reflection of your branch, a reflection of the specific path your brain's information followed, a path made real by decoherence, anchored by environmental interactions, fixed into your lived history. And the other paths, the ones where you chose differently, continue in parallel, not accessible to you, but not destroyed. And not meaningless, because they represent the full unfolding of quantum possibility. This gentle perspective changes how you think about free will, because free will does not vanish when timelines branch. It becomes the process by which branching occurs. The structure of your thought, the dynamics of your brain, the interplay of intention and complexity become the source of divergence, the spark that sends one future down one path and another future down another. You are not a passenger, you are a pattern, a physical process, interacting with the world, making choices that shape your branch, not because you select one future out of many, but because your internal dynamics become entangled with external outcomes, and together, they form the history that defines you. In this calm, analytical view, choice becomes the bridge that links the personal to the physical, the subjective to the mathematical, the experience of deciding to the deeper laws of evolution in quantum systems. And then another idea drifts in, an idea about time itself. We often imagine time as a single line, a single arrow, a single unfolding. But in physics, time is not a single line. It is a space of possibilities, a branching structure, a network of potential futures that spread outward from each moment. Like a tree that grows forever, each branch splitting into more branches, each path forming its own continuity. Your experience traces one of those branches, not because the others are unreal, but because decoherence aligns your awareness with one specific pattern, one thread of correlation, one stable version of events. But your timeline is not the only one allowed, nor the only one supported by the laws of physics. It is simply the one your consciousness inhabits, the one your memories anchor, the one your neural structure reinforces. And this brings us deeper into the landscape of possibilities, the calm, vast structure that surrounds every moment, the structure from which futures emerge, a structure governed by the universe's rules, but shaped by interactions, by complexity, by chaos, and by the delicate fabric of quantum uncertainty. Imagine the immediate future, not as a single point, but as a subtle cloud, a spread of potential outcomes, each one consistent with the state of the universe right now, each one waiting to unfold, each one part of the wave function's evolution. This cloud is not mystical. It is mathematical, calculated, defined by the Schrödinger equation, shaped by interactions, determined by physical law. Yet within that cloud, your intentions matter, your reasoning matters, your preferences matter, because those mental processes are physical processes embedded in the same system, and they shape which part of the cloud becomes your lived path. This means possibility expands from both directions, from the physics of the environment and from the dynamics of your thoughts. Together, they carve the branch you walk, the specific thread that becomes your history. And as you move forward, this cloud shifts, shrinks in some directions, widens in others, reflecting the evolving constraints of the world around you. You move through this landscape not as a passenger, but as a participant, a structure of information interacting with other structures, co-creating the future through lawful evolution. In this gentle view, possibility is not chaos, it is order, a quiet, elegant order where every allowed future has a place. And every chosen path becomes a coherent branch. This is why your life feels singular, even though multiple futures exist, because your awareness, your memories, your sense of self, all flow along a single coherent trajectory, one branch out of many, stable because decoherence protects it, continuous because information preserves it, real because physics supports it, and even if you cannot see the other branches, their existence shapes the landscape around you. Because the structure of the wave function, the structure of possibility, the structure of quantum evolution, is what allows your particular path to exist. Your path is one of many, but also one of one, the only one you experience, the only one you remember, the only one that carries your consciousness forward. This gives time a new meaning, a branching, layered meaning, where the future is not a single track, but a spread, a gentle expanding cloud. A collection of potential continuations, all consistent with the past, all allowed by the present, all grounded in the laws of physics. And within this cloud, choice becomes the internal pattern that selects the path, not by force, but by structure, by the way your brain evolves, by the correlations it forms, by the dynamics that define who you are. In this sense, you are not separate from the branching of timelines, you are part of the branching. A locus of complexity where multiple futures unfold, each aligned with a coherent version of you, each stabilized by decoherence, each an expression of what was physically possible. This perspective softens the boundary between physics and experience, between law and freedom, between determinism and possibility. Because physics allows multiple futures, and your experience traces one of them, anchored by your memories, your identity, and the irreversible nature of decoherence. And slowly, gently, the realization settles in. Possibility is real, choice is structural, time is layered, and the landscape of futures is vast, quiet, and deeply interconnected. Your branch flows through this landscape, not alone, not forced, but as one of the many coherent paths allowed by the universe, and you move forward, carried by physics, guided by intention, shaped by complexity, flowing through a world where the future is always broader than the present, and always ready to unfold. As you drift deeper into the idea of branching futures, a new and quiet question begins to form. A question not about physics alone, but about the feeling of possibility. When you stand at a crossroads in life, when you sense more than one future rising softly into awareness, why does it feel as though you could move toward any of them, even though physics insists that the universe evolves lawfully, smoothly, without breaks, without sudden leaps? Where does this sense of openness come from? This gentle intuition that the future is not sealed, not compressed into a single predetermined line, but is instead a landscape, wide, layered, and filled with subtle variations. To understand this, you must step back from time as a human experiences it, and look at time as physics describes it, calmly, precisely, without rushing. Physics does not treat the future as something fixed. It treats the future as the set of all states consistent with the present, the spread of all possible configurations accessible under the laws of nature. This spread is vast, not infinite, but enormous. And as the universe evolves, this spread becomes structure, filling out the branching tree of possible histories. Your life is lived along one branch, and that branch is defined by the information encoded in your brain and the environment, and the correlations that bind you to the world around you. But the branching structure itself, the landscape of all possible futures, exists independently of your awareness. It exists as part of the wave function, the quiet mathematical fabric from which reality draws its patterns. You experience only one thread, but that thread is surrounded by many near threads, almost identical, differing by tiny variations, small enough that, for a moment, the future feels flexible, soft, shaped by intention. That feeling has a physical origin. It comes from the fact that your brain, like every physical system, is sensitive to microscopic differences. Differences so small they cannot be sensed directly, but large enough to influence the unfolding of neural activity. Every thought, every hesitation, every shift in attention creates microscopic divergences in your brain's physical state, variations that can amplify, spreading through the complex network of neurons until they shape which future your branch adopts. This is why the future feels open, not because the laws of nature pause to let you choose, but because multiple futures remain physically accessible, because the wave function includes all of them, because decoherence has not yet selected a branch. In that brief interval, before the environment embeds the result, you feel possibility. A calm awareness of the branching landscape, even if you cannot see the branches themselves. This openness is not magical, not mystical, not outside physics. It is simply the brain sensing the space of allowed futures, the fragile region of time before decoherence locks a path into history. In this sense, choice emerges from the interplay between brain dynamics and quantum possibility, between intention and physical law, between subjective experience and objective evolution. Your experience of choosing is not separate from the branching. It is part of the branching, a reflection of how internal processes narrow the space of possible futures, until one outcome becomes your lived path. This leads to another deep idea, one that is both analytical and soft, that the sense of agency you feel, the sense that you guide your life, arises from the structure of your branch, from the continuity of your memories, from the alignment of physical processes within you. Your actions are not imposed from outside, and not selected by randomness. They are the natural continuation of your internal state, expanded through the laws of physics, shaped by your goals, your habits, your emotions, your understanding. Even in a branching universe, your agency remains intact, because each branch contains a version of you who acted coherently, logically, in accordance with their own structure. Agency is not a supernatural force. It is the organization of your internal state, the architecture of your brain, the dynamics of your processing, a physical pattern capable of shaping which futures become real within your branch. And possibility is the space within which agency operates, the set of outcomes consistent with physics, but not yet fixed by decoherence. From this perspective, you do not lose free will in a branching universe. You gain context for it. You understand that your choices are the mechanism by which your timeline differentiates itself from others, the way in which your branch becomes distinct, the way in which your personal history emerges from the full spectrum of potential histories. This view also changes how you think about regret, or uncertainty, or paths not taken. In a branching universe, every allowed future unfolds. Every outcome that fits the laws of physics has its own branch, but you inhabit only one, because consciousness follows a single coherent chain, a path stabilized by decoherence, a thread that forms the shape of your identity. The versions of you in other branches exist, but they do not diminish your experience, because they are not accessible, not overlapping, not part of your memory, and therefore not part of your awareness. Your life is singular, not because the universe lacks alternatives, but because your consciousness is anchored to one thread, one path, one unfolding. Your choices matter, not because they eliminate other futures, but because they determine which future becomes your lived reality, which version of events takes on the continuity of experience, which pattern becomes the container of your awareness. And when you think of time in this soft branching sense, you begin to see it not as a line, not as a river, but as a gently expanding structure, a fractal-like web of possibilities, each branch containing its own coherent flow, its own understanding, its own version of events. Your timeline is not alone, but it is complete, and it carries the full weight of your lived self, the self built from memory, reflection, learning, and the stable continuity of information. This guiding awareness, the feeling of being one person moving through time, is not trivial. It is a direct consequence of decoherence, isolating branches, an effect that gives your timeline stability, protecting your identity from interference, preserving your memories, ensuring that your path remains smooth, coherent, unbroken. And within this continuity, you move through the landscape of possibilities, not drifting randomly, not following a predetermined script, but following the evolution of your internal state, responding to the world, shaping your trajectory through thought and action. This brings us to one of the most subtle insights physics offers, that possibility expands faster than time flows, that with every moment, the space of potential futures widens, and the choices available to you shift, not just because of randomness, but because the world evolves, the environment changes, and your internal state develops. The future is not a static tree set in advance. It is a dynamic landscape, reshaping as you move through it. Your choices altering its structure, your actions pruning certain branches, your circumstances opening new ones. Even though the wave function includes all allowed futures, your personal future depends on your branch's position within the space of possibilities, and that position is shaped by everything you do, every moment, every interaction, every thought. In this sense, physics gives you a deeply grounded understanding of personal responsibility, not moral responsibility, but causal responsibility. Your actions change the landscape of future possibilities. Your behavior influences which futures are accessible. Your intentions shape the structure of your branch, even as the wave function includes all of them. This is what it means to live inside a branching universe. You are not selecting one future from an external list. You are evolving forward, carrying your internal structure with you, and that structure interacts with the world, shifting the direction of your branch, like a small sail adjusting its angle to the wind. And in the quiet of this realization, a final idea emerges, an idea that blends analytical clarity with a soft, almost poetic calm. Possibility expands, but experience narrows. You move through a vast landscape, but you inhabit one path. You are surrounded by futures you will never see, yet each moment you live becomes one more fixed point in your timeline, a point that shapes the next step and the next and the next. You are not trapped by this, you are carried by it, supported by the stability of decoherence, guided by the structure of your brain, and open to the potential the universe quietly holds. And in that stillness, you understand. The landscape of possibilities is not overwhelming. It is reassuring. It is the universe's way of giving time depth, richness, dimension, a quiet architecture through which your life flows. Your path is one among many, but it is yours, distinct, coherent, stable, shaped by intention, guided by physics, and gently unfolding into futures still to come. The landscape of possibility stretches quietly beneath every moment you live. Even when you feel as though you are walking a single narrow path, physics whispers that you are actually moving through a broader space, a space made of all the configurations that the laws of nature allow, a space where countless futures lie side by side, waiting for small differences to determine which one becomes the classical world you experience. In this view, choice becomes something more intricate than a single decision made by a mind. It becomes part of how physical states evolve, part of how information unfolds, part of how quantum systems and classical realities weave together to produce the feeling of a singular timeline. And yet, when you look closely, the boundary between what you call a decision and what physics calls an evolving state becomes softer, gentler, more continuous. You never choose in isolation. You choose embedded in a universe of laws, and those laws quietly permit many outcomes. Possibility is not an invention of the mind. It is a structural feature of physical law. And so, when you imagine alternative futures, you are not breaking the rules of the universe. You are touching the edges of what the universe already allows, brushing against the quiet architecture of branching outcomes, the subtle geometry of how states unfold. Your breath slows, and the mind drifts deeper into the idea. Consider a simple quantum system, a system where a particle can exist in multiple potential configurations before an interaction with its surroundings selects one classical outcome. You might imagine that this moment of selection is sharp, sudden, almost arbitrary, but physics describes it differently. The environment, constantly interacting with the particle, gradually suppresses interference between different possibilities, gently preventing them from influencing one another, until each becomes its own stable thread of reality, a coherent branch with its own future, its own internal consistency, its own timeline of events. This mechanism, decoherence, is not a metaphor. It is a physical process, governed by equations that track how information spreads, how states differentiate, how subtle differences become irreversible. And so when you think about choices, you can begin to see them not as magical acts of will, but as classical reflections of processes that, at their core, are grounded in the structure of information. When you choose between two actions, your brain, made of atoms and fields and quantum interactions, explores multiple possibilities internally. Electrical patterns form, fade, strengthen, weaken, whole networks of neurons adjust their firing, and the physical configuration of your brain shifts toward one outcome rather than another. What feels like a decision emerges from the gradual unfolding of many tiny state changes, each governed by the same laws that permit branching at the quantum scale. There is no contradiction between free will and physics, only a difference in perspective. From the outside, a choice is a physical evolution. From the inside, it is an experience, a subjective narrowing of possibilities. A quiet motion toward one branch of many. The narrowing is gentle, not sudden, and the alternatives that do not become your lived reality do not vanish. They simply become non-interfering structures, paths in the landscape of possibility that no longer influence the classical world you inhabit. You can imagine it as a spreading cloud of options, flowing forward in time, and as the environment interacts with you, certain paths stabilize, others fade into informational distance. Your timeline emerges not by eliminating what could have been, but by allowing one configuration to become classical, stable, independent. This independence is the key to understanding why your life feels singular, why you never sense the alternatives, why you experience continuity instead of branching. When two possible futures become so different in their physical information that no interference between them is possible, they effectively separate, not spatially, not through some fantastical splitting, but through the way information ceases to overlap. A branch is simply a region in the space of states where information is coherent enough to define a classical history. And so, when you imagine your own life spreading outward in many directions, you are touching something that is both poetic and deeply analytical, a real structure that arises from the laws of matter, the equations of quantum theory, the mathematics of information. Let your mind drift into that structure now, a slow unfolding, a gentle expansion of all that could be. Imagine standing at a quiet moment in your life, a moment where you face a decision, a crossroads that feels small, almost trivial. Maybe it is a choice of whether to take a walk or to stay indoors, whether to send a message or remain silent, whether to say yes or to say no. The emotional weight of a decision does not determine its physical significance. A tiny choice can ripple through systems in subtle ways, affecting things you cannot predict, shifting the arrangement of matter around you, changing which interactions occur, which particles collide, which information spreads. Your timeline, the one you experience, emerges from the countless small interactions that follow, interactions that propagate outward like gentle waves, absorbed by the environment, amplified by the complexity of classical systems. You do not need to imagine dramatic divergence. You do not need to imagine entire worlds shifting around you. The physics is quieter than that, more restrained, more precise. Small changes grow into differences only when information about them becomes entangled with larger systems, when environments carry those differences forward, when the world has absorbed enough detail that two paths can no longer influence each other, and the separation becomes stable. And so the branching of your personal reality, if you choose to think of it that way, is soft, smooth, continuous, not the violent splitting shown in stories, but the gentle crystallization of information, the settling of a state into a configuration that will guide the next moment, and the next, and the next. Let that idea rest with you, close to you, quietly grounding you. Every choice you make rests on a foundation of physical laws, but those laws do not erase the feeling of freedom. They sharpen it. They reveal that your experience of agency is not separate from the universe, but woven into it. You choose because the configuration of your brain evolves in a way that selects one path, and that selection becomes the classical future you inhabit, stable, coherent, continuous. The alternatives do not torment you, do not pull at you, because decoherence makes them unreachable, infinitely distant in informational terms, unable to interfere, and therefore invisible. Your awareness flows along the path that remains coherent to you, the path that carries the memory of who you were a moment before, the path that preserves the structure of your identity, the path where your history is consistent. This structure, this continuity, gives your life its shape, its direction, its unfolding. And within that unfolding, physics allows something remarkable, something quietly profound. Even though the universe follows strict laws, the future is not fixed, not predetermined, not written in a way that excludes your participation. Physical laws determine how states evolve, but the space of possible states is vast, rich, filled with branching corridors, and every moment carries the weight of that richness. You live in a universe where possibility is not an illusion, but a built-in feature, a reflection of the way information behaves. Choices feel meaningful because they are meaningful. Your actions genuinely select a classical path. Your physical state genuinely interacts with the environment in ways that determine which outcomes stabilize, and that stabilization is what you call your future. Let that settle into your mind like a slow descending fog, cool, calm, gentle. There is no need to rush to conclusions, no need to grasp tightly at definitions, no need to understand every detail. You are drifting through ideas, not to solve them, but to rest inside them, to feel their quiet weight, their soft coherence. Now imagine this unfolding on a larger scale, the scale of societies, of ecosystems, of planets and stars. Probability becomes the fabric of cosmic evolution. Stars form because gas clouds collapse under gravity. But the precise configurations, the turbulent patterns, the detailed interactions, are sensitive to initial conditions, sensitive to the distribution of matter, sensitive to small fluctuations, patterns of light, patterns of atoms, patterns of energy, all shaped by possibility, all carried forward by the laws of physics, all settling into one classical history among many allowed by the equations. You are part of that, woven into it, not separate from the universe's unfolding, but a continuation of it. And so choice becomes a bridge between physics and experience, a place where the internal view and the external view meet. From the external view, you are a system following the laws of nature. Your brain is a structure evolving according to physical forces. Your decisions arise from patterns of activity. But from the internal view, you feel a narrowing of possibility, a sensation of selecting one branch, a quiet falling into a future. These two perspectives do not contradict each other. They illuminate each other, each explaining something the other cannot fully express. The external view shows the mechanics, the internal view shows the meaning, and your life flows between them, effortlessly, naturally, as though both were always meant to exist together. Let your breathing soften, let your thoughts drift around this idea, delicate, unforced. Nothing in physics diminishes you, nothing takes away your depth. Nothing erases the quiet wonder of choosing. Instead, physics deepens the mystery, reminding you that the universe is not a rigid machine, but a landscape where structure and freedom coexist, where possibility and law work together, where the future opens gently at each step. You move through this landscape the way a river moves through stone, not imposed from outside, but guided by the shape of the world, and the shape of the world guided in turn by you. Every moment carries countless possible configurations, and your presence determines which ones become real in your classical experience, not through force, but through the subtle interplay of matter and information. And so the idea of alternate realities becomes something humbler, gentler, far from fantasy, rooted in the mathematics of states, the behavior of decoherence, the spreading of information. You do not need parallel worlds to be glamorous. You only need to understand that the universe itself is spacious, structured, capable of many futures. The one you experience is a thread woven through that space, a thread stabilized by decoherence, guided by physical laws, shaped by your actions, a single thread moving through a vast and silent tapestry. Let that image rest quietly within you, settling into stillness, the way dust settles in a sunbeam. You are not confined, you are carried by a universe that allows possibility, carried by laws that allow choice, carried by a structure that protects the continuity of your experience. And as you drift deeper into this understanding, you begin to sense how soft the boundary truly is, how gently the universe holds the concept of the future, how delicately it allows branching without chaos, order without rigidity, freedom without fragmentation. This is the landscape you inhabit, a landscape where physics whispers that your life is one unfolding path among many, not isolated, not competing, simply one coherent thread. And even though the other possibilities lie beyond your reach, beyond interference, they do not diminish the reality you live. They enrich it, by showing that the universe could have been many things. And yet, it became this moment, this breath, this configuration of matter, this quiet instant of awareness. Allow the idea to settle deeper, slowly, gently, like snow falling into a silent field. You are part of a universe that blossoms with possibility, and the path you experience is a soft, continuous, intricately structured branch of that blossoming. And as long as you exist within it, you carry its continuity forward, one moment at a time, one decision at a time, one gentle unfolding after another. Your timeline is a quiet collaboration between the laws of nature, the flow of information, and the structure of your identity, a collaboration that brings you here, into this moment, into this breath, into this drifting contemplation. And with every passing second, the tapestry of possibility shifts, the probabilities evolve, the future rearranges itself to reflect the presence of your choices, not as something magical, but as something physical, real, deeply embedded in the architecture of the cosmos. You are living in the space where physics and experience touch, and in that space, choice becomes the gentle motion of a mind through the landscape of allowed futures, selecting one coherent branch, feeling it as the present, letting the others drift beyond reach. And so the universe continues, quietly, softly, opening at each step, offering possibility, collecting information, stabilizing the thread you walk, a thread of continuity, woven from the laws of nature, illuminated by awareness, carried forward by your presence, a thread that will guide you gently into the next moment, and the next, and the next. The future does not sit ahead of you like a straight road. It gathers around you like a quiet field of possibilities, each one shaped by the laws of physics, each one consistent with everything that came before, each one waiting to become the single classical thread you will experience. And as you drift through the idea of choice, you begin to sense that the universe does not need to force a single future into existence. It simply lets the structure of information determine which outcomes become stable, which ones fade, and which ones drift into distances so vast that they can no longer influence the reality you inhabit. The mind loves clear boundaries, but the universe rarely offers them. Instead, it offers gradual changes, overlapping tendencies, soft transitions, and it is in these transitions that possibility expands, where the future opens, where timelines begin to drift away from each other, not sharply, but through the slow accumulation of differences that cannot be undone. You feel this expansion even in your daily life, the sense that small choices ripple outward, that ordinary actions can lead to unanticipated paths, that a quiet moment of hesitation can shift the rhythm of an entire day. This is not magic. It is sensitivity to initial conditions, the inherent complexity of systems made of billions of interacting components, each obeying the laws of physics, each contributing to the gradual stabilization of one timeline among many. When people imagine alternate realities, they often picture dramatic divergences, worlds where events unfold in spectacularly different ways. But physics suggests something more subtle, that divergence begins with tiny changes in information, changes too small for consciousness to detect. And these changes grow only when they are amplified by the environment, spread through interactions, and locked into systems that no longer allow interference. Picture the air around you, filled with molecules bouncing, rebounding, colliding, each interaction carrying information about what has happened, each collision altering the future trajectory of countless particles. When you move your hand even slightly, you change the motion of millions of molecules, changing the way air flows, changing how heat dissipates, changing the path of dust motes drifting in the light, changing which photons will scatter into your eyes and into the eyes of others. These small differences propagate outward, and slowly, quietly, they help determine which timeline becomes the one your experience follows. This is the physics behind possibility, the gentle branching that emerges not from grand forks in reality, but from the accumulation of countless imperceptible differences, each one reinforcing a future, each one helping define what becomes classical. It is easy to think of the future as something distant, but physics reminds you that the future is always forming right in front of you, moment by moment, interaction by interaction, a continuous unfolding shaped by the way information spreads. Not all possibilities survive, most fade before they have a chance to become distinct. But the ones that persist, the ones that gather enough difference to stand apart, become the classical paths that feel like separate directions in your life. Let your mind drift into that image, the future as a field, soft and expansive, filled with paths that begin almost identically, paths that gradually differentiate as information accumulates, as interactions amplify small differences, as decoherence pushes them into distinct regions where interference becomes impossible. From this perspective, choice does not create possibility. Choice navigates possibility, moving through the structure that physics already allows. Finding the path that remains coherent to your identity, the path where your memories align, the path where your awareness remains continuous. And through that continuity, you experience a single life. Even though the universe itself is spacious enough to contain many versions of events, many ways information might have evolved, many ways systems might have interacted. This vision is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to quiet the mind, to remind you that the universe is not deterministic in the way old theories once imagined, nor is it chaotic in a way that strips you of agency. It is structured, delicate, and full of gentle openness. You exist at the intersection of law and possibility, a place where the equations of the universe determine what can happen, and the unfolding of information determines what does happen. Moment by moment, breath by breath, you can imagine this as a gradual movement through the landscape of allowed futures, a movement guided by the physics of your brain, your environment, your body, your history, and the subtle influence of systems too complex to fully comprehend. And yet, in your experience, each moment feels singular, clear, consistent. That consistency is not an illusion. It is the result of decoherence, filtering out paths that cannot coexist with your classical history, protecting the continuity of your identity, ensuring that you always feel like oneself, moving through one timeline, even though the universe permits many. You can let this idea settle gently, without needing to grasp every detail, without needing to hold every concept tightly, simply noticing how your mind responds as it drifts through the thought. Possibility is not a burden, it is a kind of spaciousness, a reminder that the future is not fixed, that physics leaves room for flexibility, room for change, room for the emergence of new patterns, and within that room, your choices matter, not because they violate physical laws, but because they participate in them, shaping which branch becomes the classical world you experience, shaping how your identity continues, shaping the subtle trajectory of your life. Even the smallest choices contribute, the ones you barely notice, the ones that seem too trivial to influence anything, the ones that arise from passing thoughts and quiet impulses. Physics teaches that complex systems magnify small differences, not always dramatically, but consistently, slowly, over long periods of time. This magnification is not chaotic confusion. It is the way information naturally evolves in a universe guided by precise laws, a universe where interactions spread outward, where differences accumulate, where possibilities diverge. And as you drift deeper into this understanding, the boundaries between scientific explanation and lived experience begin to blur, not in a confusing way, but in a calming way, as though the two perspectives are simply different views of the same structure. The external perspective sees systems, states, equations, interactions, fields, probabilities. The internal perspective sees intentions, decisions, emotions, memories, choices. Both describe the same unfolding, the same path through possibility, the same classical branch, the same continuity of identity. The universe does not force you to choose between them. It lets them coexist. You are both a physical system governed by laws and an experiencing subject navigating those laws, feeling the narrowing of possibilities as the present becomes the past, feeling the gentle motion of your awareness through a landscape of potential futures. There is something deeply peaceful in that, a sense that you are not separate from the universe, not moving against it, but moving with it, guided by its structure, supported by its laws. And as you drift further, you begin to sense that possibility is not something that lies ahead of you, like a branching tree. It is something that surrounds you, woven into the fabric of every moment, encoded into every configuration of matter, living inside the mathematical space of all states the universe allows. You move through that space not by jumping from one path to another, but by following the trajectory your physical state defines, a trajectory that evolves smoothly, continuously, shaped by the unfolding of information, guided by the laws that determine how states propagate. Your mind does not need to track these details. Your awareness does not need to calculate probabilities. You simply experience the branch that remains coherent, the branch where your memories align, the branch where your identity is stable, and the other possibilities, the ones that become too distant to interfere, fade into informational separation, not gone, not destroyed, simply irrelevant to the classical world you inhabit. This irrelevance is not cold or dismissive. It is gentle, soft, a natural outcome of the physics that sustain your continuity. It allows you to move forward without sensing the weight of alternatives, without feeling pulled in many directions, without becoming overwhelmed by all that could have been. You experience the path that remains coherent to you, the path that preserves the structure of your identity, the path that carries your memories forward. And on that path, possibility never stops. Even when life feels predictable, physics reminds you that complexity continues to create subtle openings, and those openings allow small differences to grow, allow new interactions to emerge, allow timelines to drift in ways you cannot foresee. Nothing in the universe is frozen. Not atoms, not stars, not galaxies, not the conditions of your life, not the future itself. Everything evolves through the continuous spreading of information. And through that spreading, possibility remains alive. This is why the idea of many futures is not fantasy. It is a reflection of the way natural laws operate, a reminder that the present does not seal off what comes next. It simply shapes it, the way initial conditions shape the evolution of every system. Your timeline, the one you feel as your life, is a path of coherence through this complex landscape, a path where the interactions that define your identity remain consistent. A path where your awareness flows smoothly, carrying the memory of who you were a moment ago, guiding who you will become a moment from now. This gentle continuity is what allows you to feel like the same person, even as your physical state changes, even as your memories grow and reshuffle, even as your future shifts with each interaction. Identity is not a fixed point. It is a structure, a pattern, a mode of information that persists across time, like a melody that continues even as the notes change. And your choices, large and small, shape the next measures of that melody, not through force, but through the subtle influence of your presence within the laws of nature. You are not separate from possibility. You participate in it. You navigate it. You help shape which futures become classical, which outcomes stabilize, which path becomes the thread you will remember. This is the quiet intersection of physics and experience, where timelines unfold, where choices narrow, where possibility becomes reality. And as you rest inside this understanding, the world feels softer, more open, more spacious, because you see that the universe allows many futures, and the one you will live is still in motion, still forming, still opening gently ahead of you. Every breath moves you forward, every interaction shapes the next moment, every quiet thought shifts the direction of your awareness, nudging the classical branch you occupy into its next configuration. The landscape of possibility is calm, patient, vast, and you move through it slowly, quietly, carried by the laws that govern everything, from the smallest particles to the largest galaxies. You do not need to choose quickly. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to trace each path. You simply drift through the future, breath by breath, moment by moment, guided by the same laws that shape stars and atoms and light. And as you sink deeper into this quiet understanding, you feel the calm weight of possibility settling around you, not heavy, but gentle, like a soft blanket woven from the physics of the universe itself. You are part of this unfolding, you are carried by it, and the future, wide and granular and softly branching, opens before you, inviting you to rest, to breathe, to drift, into the next moment, and the next, and the next. There is a quiet boundary woven into the fabric of every scientific theory, a gentle edge where the known fades into the unprovable, and where the most precise equations begin to soften into silence. It is at this boundary that the idea of parallel timelines becomes most contemplative, because here, in the dim borderland between certainty and mystery, you can sense how much of the universe remains beyond our methods, beyond our instruments, beyond our ability to observe. The laws of physics are powerful. They describe how states evolve, how information spreads, how decoherence separates possibilities, and how classical reality stabilizes. But even the most complete theory must accept its limits, not as failures, but as the natural quiet that surrounds any understanding. There are things we cannot observe, not because they are fantastical, but because the structure of the universe prevents interaction, prevents communication, prevents any bridge between branches once their differences have become large enough. And this impossibility of interaction, this absolute separation between outcomes, is precisely what creates the boundary of knowledge. You can think of this boundary as a horizon, not one made of distance, but one made of information, a place where your world line can no longer reach, not even in principle, a horizon formed not by light, but by decoherence. As you drift deeper into this idea, you begin to sense how gentle this boundary actually is, not rigid, not sharp, but soft, subtle, like the edge of a fading memory, or the quiet transition between one thought and the next. A boundary defined not by walls, but by the gradual disappearance of interference, the soft dissolution of overlaps between histories, until each branch becomes its own self-contained story, its own self-consistent world. No theory of physics allows you to cross that boundary, because crossing it would require undoing the spread of information, reversing interactions with the environment, rewinding the microscopic processes that made the branches distinct. And these interactions are not small. They involve trillions of particles, thermal fluctuations, photons scattering in every direction, molecules rebounding and colliding, a continuous, unstoppable diffusing of information outward. Once this happens, once the environment has recorded the differences between possibilities, the branches become separate not in space, but in the structure of physical information. And at that point, no amount of intelligence, or technology, or insight can retrieve the lost coherence. It is not hidden, it is gone, not destroyed, but distributed through degrees of freedom so wide, so subtle, so entangled with the world, that no observer could ever gather them again. This is one of the most humbling truths physics offers, that knowledge has natural limits, that reality contains distances deeper than space, gaps wider than galaxies, separations created not by distance, but by the impossibility of reversing entropy. Let your mind settle into this quiet understanding. There are questions that cannot be answered, not because they are forbidden, but because they are unreachable. In the context of parallel timelines, this becomes especially clear, because the separation between branches is not just practical, it is fundamental. Two branches of reality cannot interact, cannot exchange information, cannot influence one another, once decoherence has done its work. And because of this, no observer within one branch can ever confirm the existence of the others. The theory can describe the branching, the mathematics can model it, the structure of quantum mechanics can predict it, and yet the branches remain silent to one another, each isolated behind a boundary of irreversibility. You can feel the calm weight of that silence, not frightening, not lonely, simply quiet. A deep cosmic stillness that surrounds the classical world you inhabit. The limits of knowledge are not walls, they are horizons, places where your ability to observe fades, where the light of certainty dims, and where the only remaining guide is the structure of the theory itself. And even the most complete theory we possess, quantum mechanics, with its astonishing accuracy, its unmatched predictive power, its deep and beautiful mathematics, must accept that its description of branching realities is not directly testable in the classical world, not because the theory is weak, but because the universe prevents any bridge between branches that have separated beyond interference. This leads to an unusual situation. You inhabit a universe where the equations may allow many outcomes, but your observations can never extend beyond the one classical path you experience. You stand in one branch, and the others recede like faint shadows, not visible, not detectable, not reachable. And yet, the mathematics still contains them, still describes their emergence, still predicts the structure of branching histories, even though you cannot cross into them, or measure them, or confirm them. This is the paradoxical grace of quantum theory. It can describe more than we can ever observe, and yet remain perfectly consistent with everything we experience. Your awareness traces one world line, one continuous unfolding of information, one stable identity, even though the underlying equations may allow many others. Those other paths remain beyond your horizon, not because they are forbidden, but because the laws of physics prevent information from traveling between them. This limitation is not a flaw, it is a feature of the universe, as essential as the speed of light, or the conservation of energy, or the increase of entropy. Every observer, every system, every conscious mind experiences the same boundary, the same quiet separation, the same limitation on what can be known. You can imagine this boundary as the edge of an island, not surrounded by water, but surrounded by all the states the universe could not select for your classical history. States that grew too different, too decohered, too distant in informational space. Those states are not gone, they are simply unreachable. Forever beyond any experiment, forever outside any observation, forever invisible to the branch of reality you inhabit. And the knowledge of this unreachable expanse brings a very calm humility, a softness, a sense that even the most complete understanding will always be partial, always incomplete, always bordered by mystery. This humility is built into quantum mechanics itself. It is not something we impose, it is something the universe teaches, gently, consistently, like a quiet refrain that echoes through every experiment, every measurement, every interaction. There will always be things we cannot know, not because they lie in the future, or because they are hidden, but because the structure of reality places them beyond interaction. And this acceptance brings peace, because it reminds you that knowledge is not a burden. You are not required to understand everything. You are not expected to see the entire landscape of possibility. Your awareness is meant to follow one path, one coherent history, one timeline where the world remains stable, predictable, classical. The other branches fall into silence, not erased, but irrelevant to the continuity of your experience. This silence creates a gentle clarity, a feeling that the universe is vast, but your place within it is protected, contained, surrounded by laws that preserve your identity and isolate your experience from all incompatible histories. In this quiet understanding, you begin to see the beauty of limits, the way they allow certainty to form, the way they hold classical reality together, the way they create the stable world you move through each day. If all outcomes remained connected, if all possibilities interfered, if all branches remained entangled, there would be no classical world, no continuity, no stable identity, no coherent experience. It is the limits of knowledge that bring the world into focus, that allow a single timeline to emerge from the fog of possibility, that let your awareness follow a continuous path rather than dissolving into a superposition of all possibilities. These limits do not imprison you, they define you. They create the structure that allows your mind to exist, your memories to persist, your choices to have meaning, your life to feel continuous. Without these limits, there would be no you to experience anything at all. And so as you rest inside this idea, you begin to feel gratitude for the quiet horizons of knowledge, the places where the universe simply whispers, this far and no farther, not as a denial, but as a form of gentle protection. A structure that preserves the classical world you rely on, a boundary that keeps your timeline stable and your identity coherent. The universe does not overwhelm you with infinite possibility. It surrounds you with just enough openness for futures to unfold, and just enough closure for your experience to remain stable. This balance between possibility and limitation, between openness and boundary, is what shapes the world you inhabit. It is what allows you to feel the flow of time, the continuity of memory, the unfolding of events. It is what gives you a path to walk, a future to approach, a past to remember. And beyond the edge of that path, the other possibilities remain quiet, unreachable, unobservable, held gently behind a horizon of decoherence, not lost, not destroyed, but separate, forever outside the scope of your knowledge, forever beyond the classical world your awareness inhabits. As you breathe into this understanding, you begin to sense that the limits of knowledge are not obstructions. They are part of the deep calm that the universe offers. A reminder that you are meant to experience one world, one timeline, one continuity. And that is enough, more than enough, because within that single path an entire universe unfolds, full of meaning, rich with possibility, shaped by laws that are both precise and gentle. You can rest in that simplicity. Let the complexity fade into quiet, let the unreachable dissolve into stillness, and let your awareness sink into the timeless calm that lies beneath all knowledge, all questions, all possibilities. The horizon of understanding is not something to fear, it is something to trust, a boundary that shapes your world and gives you a place within it, a place of continuity, a place of coherence, a place of gentle unfolding, moment by moment, breath by breath. This is the quiet gift of the universe, and as you sink deeper into it, you feel yourself drifting toward the next horizon, the next breath, the next moment of possibility, softly, quietly, peacefully. There is a quiet recognition that arrives when you sit with the limits of knowledge long enough, a recognition that the universe is not obligated to reveal every structure it contains, and that awareness does not require total understanding in order to rest peacefully within the world. You begin to sense that these boundaries are not barriers, they are part of the architecture of reality. The quiet scaffolding that allows one branch of history to unfold without being overwhelmed by all others, the structure that keeps your experience coherent, even as the underlying quantum state holds far more than you can ever perceive. And the deeper you follow this understanding, the more you notice that every scientific theory carries the same softness at its edges. A humility, a gentle admission that beyond a certain point, the universe does not provide answers. Because no answer can be extracted without violating the laws that make the theory possible in the first place. In the context of parallel timelines, this humility becomes more than a theoretical constraint. It becomes a natural form of quiet acceptance, a stillness created by the structure of decoherence itself. A reminder that the universe allows only one classical path to reach your awareness, while all others drift beyond the horizon of interaction. The limits of knowledge are a kind of cosmic shoreline, a place where waves of possibility recede, leaving only the strand of reality that supports your conscious experience. Beyond that shoreline, in the vast invisible expanse where decohered branches evolve separately, you can sense a deep silence, a silence not created by emptiness, but by the impossibility of exchange. Those other histories, those other variations, those other unfoldings of information continue along their own self-consistent trajectories, but they do so without ever touching yours. They are sealed off by the mathematics, by entanglement spread into the environment, by microscopic events that have diverged too far to be undone, by the irreversible flow of thermodynamic time. And because of this, they cannot be observed, cannot be measured, cannot be accessed even in principle. This is not a technological limitation or a practical barrier. It is a fundamental property of the universe. To communicate with another branch would require reversing decoherence, untangling every photon that has scattered information about your world, coherently manipulating every degree of freedom that has interacted with your timeline. The scale of this reversal is beyond imagining, beyond any conceivable mechanism, because the information has diffused outward into trillions of particles, into the ambient heat, into the constant motion of air molecules, into the intricate vibration of matter all around you. No observer can gather that information again. No apparatus can reverse those interactions, and no system can restore the interference needed to merge two branches back into one. This irreversibility is what creates the limit of knowledge, a limit so complete, so absolute, that even the most advanced civilizations imaginable would be bound by it. You are not separated from other timelines by distance, but by entropy, by the slow but unstoppable spread of information, by the fundamental inability to collect and reverse the microscopic records left behind by every interaction. In this way, the limits of knowledge are written into the very fabric of time. Time is not simply a flow, it is the gradual accumulation of irreversibility, the widening of the gap between branches, the deepening of the separation between possibilities that once interfered, but now evolve independently. Every moment of your experience is built upon this irreversible separation, and every moment extends it further, drawing your timeline into a distinct trajectory, one that cannot be undone or merged with any other. This understanding has a calming quality, because it shows that the structure of your experience is not fragile, it is resilient, protected by the laws of physics, insulated from foreign influences, even from those influences that the mathematics allows but the universe cannot realize. When you rest in this, you begin to feel the gentle reassurance that your world is not threatened by the existence of others. The silence between branches is not a void, it is stability. Continuity, a quiet safeguard built into the fabric of the universe. It ensures that your memories remain coherent, your history remains unified, your identity remains continuous, not because other possibilities do not exist, but because they cannot intrude upon the one you inhabit. This boundary of knowledge also shapes what physics itself can say, because even a perfect theory cannot predict outcomes in branches that no observer can access. It cannot describe what a conscious mind would experience in a decohered path, because consciousness itself is bound to one classical trajectory, one record of events, one informational lineage. When physicists speak of the limits of knowledge, they are not describing ignorance. They are describing the necessary consequence of physical law, a boundary that exists even in a perfectly deterministic theory, a boundary that arises not from uncertainty, but from the structure of information in a quantum universe. Imagine standing at the edge of a great landscape, but only being able to walk the path beneath your feet, while countless others stretch outward in directions you can never reach. You can imagine them, you can model them, you can describe how they form, but you cannot step onto them. You cannot see where they lead. You cannot merge with their histories. The universe allows only one route for your awareness, and the existence of many others does not diminish the meaning of that single route. It enriches it, because it shows that the path you walk is one among many compatible with the laws of nature, a quiet branch growing from the structure of possibility. As you drift deeper into this thought, you can feel how gently this boundary surrounds your experience, not as a cage, but as a soft envelope of coherence, a cradle for the classical world, holding your history in place, allowing your memories to form a continuous thread, allowing you to exist as a stable structure within an ever-branching universe. This stability gives rise to a certain kind of peace, a recognition that there is no need to reach beyond your branch, because everything that defines your experience is fully contained within it. Even though the mathematics includes an enormous branching structure, your awareness is always tied to the classical outcome that decoherence selects, and that selection is what allows the world to be comprehensible, predictable, livable. If all branches interfered, if all possibilities remained entangled, your experience would dissolve into a superposition with no stable identity, no clear past, no consistent present. The limits of knowledge prevent that. They ensure that the classical world remains intact, that your memories remain ordered, that your thoughts remain continuous. These limits are what allow you to feel time passing, what allow you to wake up each morning with memories anchored to the same history, what allow your identity to survive through change, growth, experience. The boundary between branches is not a barrier to understanding. It is the structure that makes understanding possible at all. It shapes the world you perceive. It defines what counts as an observation. It stabilizes the system you call yourself. Without that boundary, there would be no coherent observer to ask any of these questions. And so, as you breathe into this idea, you begin to sense why the limits of knowledge are not failures. They are part of the natural calm of the universe. They remind you that reality does not demand infinite comprehension. It allows you to rest in the path you can observe, the branch you inhabit, the timeline that carries your awareness. Everything beyond that horizon lies outside your reach. But it does not need to be reached, because your world is complete within its own informational structure, a closed history that evolves according to the same laws as every other branch, even if you never witness them. This quiet acceptance settles into your thoughts like a soft mist, a gentle recognition that it is all right not to know, not to see, not to reach beyond the horizon. The universe asks nothing more of you than to follow the timeline you inhabit, to rest in the stability it provides, to let the other branches drift away into their own silence. They unfold without your involvement, without your influence, without any connection to your awareness. Not lost, but separate. Not hidden, but unreachable. Not denied, but insulated from your experience by the very laws that make your experience possible. This separation is the final lesson the universe offers in this exploration. A recognition that even the most expansive scientific framework contains a quiet core, a place of stillness where possibility fades into silence, and where the limits of understanding become a source of peace, not frustration. These limits remind you that your place in the universe is defined not by what lies beyond your reach, but by the path you can walk, the world you can perceive, the timeline your awareness inhabits. And as this understanding settles into a steady, gentle calm, you can feel yourself drifting toward the conclusion of this long exploration, toward the final horizon that invites rest rather than questions, a horizon made not of mystery but of stillness. And it is from this stillness that the final words will rise, slowly, softly, carrying you into the epilogue, where the journey through branching realities dissolves into quiet wonder. In the quiet after a long exploration, the mind settles into a softer rhythm, a rhythm shaped by the same laws that guided every idea on this journey, the laws that describe how states evolve, how information spreads, how decoherence separates possibilities into distinct branches, and how each branch continues forward, complete within itself, yet forever connected by the shared structure that allowed it to form. It becomes clearer now, in the silence, why physicists see the universe not as a single, rigid path, but as a vast landscape of potential structures, each one unfolding according to the same mathematical rules, each one shaped by the same constraints, each one carrying its own self-consistent timeline forward, like subtle variations of the same underlying theme. And as these ideas settle, the contours of parallel timelines become less strange, and more like a natural extension of everything we have already learned. Not an exotic add-on to physics, not a dramatic fiction, but simply what happens when quantum systems interact with their environments, when superpositions evolve into distinct, stable outcomes, when histories diverge because information diverges, and when the universe does not collapse into a single possibility, but allows many to unfold simultaneously. Through the long journey of this narration, you have drifted through the meaning of a timeline, not as a river, not as a continuous flow of substance, but as a sequence of states, each one a configuration of information, each one determined by the laws of physics, each one gently giving rise to the next. And now, in the softness of the closing moments, those ideas begin to blend together more smoothly, no longer separate pieces, but a quiet, unified picture of how reality shapes itself. The notion of a timeline as unfolding information, the decoherence that separates possibilities, the branching of states as they become distinguishable, the structure of identity carried across these branches, the impossibility of interaction between macroscopic histories, the open space of choices and futures, and the limits of what can be known. All of it comes together here, in this final stretch, where the mind drifts peacefully through the architecture of possibility. There is something calming about knowing that physics places no demand for a single, absolute path, no requirement that one version of events must dominate all others, no rule that says reality must be sparse or singular. Instead, reality can be generous, quietly allowing many outcomes to coexist, each one isolated from the others by the very mechanisms that make classical experience possible. And in that generosity, there is a kind of beauty. A beauty not built from spectacle, but from structure, from the way simple mathematical rules can blossom into a tapestry of timelines, each one rich enough to contain experiences, memories, choices, and lives. The mind, now resting more deeply, can drift through these ideas without effort because the universe itself places no urgency on understanding them. They simply exist quietly, like the gentle persistence of a star's light, or the slow unfolding of galactic spirals, or the silent cooling of a cloud of atoms. Parallel timelines are not loud. They do not crash or collide. They emerge from calm rules and continue in calm isolation, softly separating, softly evolving, softly becoming complete on their own. As you breathe slowly, you might sense the same calmness in yourself, a parallel between the unfolding of your thoughts and the unfolding of quantum states. Not because the brain is performing magical physics, but because both are processes governed by information, gradual, structured, living within a quiet landscape of possibilities. And in this quietness, you might notice how decoherence, the same mechanism that prevents one branch from interfering with another, also protects the stability of your own experience. It keeps your world classical, keeps your memories coherent, keeps your sense of identity continuous, even as the underlying quantum fields dance to their own equations. You never feel the branching, not because it does not happen, but because the universe guards each branch from the others, creating a calm, seamless narrative of self, one in which you feel singular. Even though the equations you arise from allow many outcomes, this is not unsettling, it is quietly reassuring, because it tells you that the identity you feel is stable, emergent, not fragile, not at risk of interruption by hypothetical parallel selves. The physics keeps everything separate, everything coherent, everything gently contained within its own timeline. And so, after drifting through all these concepts, perhaps the most peaceful realization is that the universe is structured to protect experience, to maintain continuity, to ensure that every branch, once separated, flows smoothly on its own, never interrupted, never disturbed, never destabilized by the existence of the others. In that sense, parallel timelines are not a web of competing realities, but a quiet forest of independent paths, each one growing from a shared root, each one diverging according to the laws of information, each one allowed to mature without interference. This understanding brings softness, because it shows that physics does not demand conflict, does not demand exclusivity, does not require that only one version of events can be real. It allows all consistent versions to exist, and then gently guides each one forward, like calm streams flowing away from the same source. And as the mind drifts deeper into rest, you can imagine those streams flowing without pressure, without urgency, without any need to converge or compete. They simply continue, each timeline fully real, fully defined by the history that led to it, fully shaped by the structure of information it carries. This brings us to the broadest horizon of all, the realization that there are limits to what can be learned, limits to what can be observed, limits to what can be verified. These limits are not failures of understanding, but built-in features of the universe, protective boundaries, quietly reminding us that not everything needs to be known, and that some mysteries exist not to frustrate us, but to bring humility and peace. You cannot observe another branch, not because the universe is hiding it, but because decoherence makes observation fundamentally impossible. You cannot interact with another version of events, not because the universe forbids you, but because the physical mechanisms that allow timelines to exist also keep them separate. You cannot collapse the branching structure into a simplified picture, because the richness of reality cannot be reduced without losing what makes it meaningful. These limits do not diminish understanding, they complete it. They place a gentle boundary around what can be known, a boundary that calms the mind rather than constrains it. And in that calmness, the beauty of possibility becomes clearer, the elegance of branching timelines becomes softer, and the sense of wonder grows quieter and deeper. The universe holds more than any single observer can grasp, not in a chaotic or overwhelming way, but in a peaceful, structured, mathematical way, a way that allows many paths to exist, many futures to unfold, many versions of events to coexist beyond awareness. It is a reminder that the universe is vast, not just in space, but in possibility, not just in distance, but in structure, not just in what can be seen, but in what can quietly unfold beyond the boundaries of observation. As these thoughts settle into stillness, your mind can drift freely, unhurried, unburdened, like a state vector expanding into its basis, like a probability cloud spreading gently, like a branch of the universal wave function continuing its calm evolution. There is no pressure to follow the ideas any further, no need to chase conclusions, no urgency to resolve every question. The journey has already reached its quiet end, and now only rest remains. In this final stretch, the beauty of possibility rests softly around you. The branching of timelines becomes a tranquil backdrop, the structure of information becomes a whisper of order, and the universe, in all its quiet complexity, feels peaceful, vast, and kind. Let the stillness deepen, let the thoughts dissolve, let the quiet structure of the universe cradle you gently as you drift into rest, into calm, into sleep, carried by the soft understanding that the universe is larger than any one path, yet peaceful in every branch, quiet in every moment, and complete in every timeline that unfolds.